I woke up in this body in a small village in the Dakian Empire, in a rundown house with a leaking roof, married to the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, Shuang. The problem is, the guy who owned this body before me was a complete bastard. He beat her, starved her, and wasted everything she worked for on drinking and gambling. So now my wife flinches every time I look at her. The empire's been at war for years. Most young men got drafted, and the few left behind are supposed to make babies for the country. Couples who have sons get government support. But Shuang is too weak and malnourished to get pregnant, and the old me used to hit her for that. I've been trying to be kind to her, but it only makes her more scared. She thinks I'm planning something worse, maybe selling her to a brothel. When I asked if she was hungry, she jumped up to go borrow grain from a neighbor, desperate to keep me from getting angry. Her stomach growled right after she said she wasn't hungry. It broke my heart. I told her to stay home and went out to find food. Back in my old life, I was a wilderness survival expert, and this body's father had been a hunter, so I had some skills to work with. I made a fishing rod from bamboo, twisted cord from an old net, and bent our only sewing needle into a hook over a fire. I cut through the river ice and set my line with the last few fermented wheat grains I had. I spent all day in the freezing snow trying to spear fish too, but they were too quick. By evening I was starving and frozen. Then I checked my rod. The bamboo tip was twitching. A fish was on the line. I played it carefully, letting it tire itself out, and pulled up a fat carp, at least 6 pounds. It froze solid on the ice almost instantly. On my way home, I ran into Widow Lu at the village entrance. She's 28, curvy, and she makes a living trading favors with hunters from nearby villages. She pressed herself against my arm and tried to get me to stay the night at her place. I pulled away and told her my wife was waiting for her fish. I rushed home, kicked open the door with the carp in my hand, ready to surprise Shuang. But the moment the door swung open, the fish slipped from my grip and hit the ground. Something was very wrong. I rushed inside and found Shuang lying on the freezing floor, blood pouring from her forehead where she'd hit a stool. I thought she was dead. I shook her and begged her to wake up, told her I caught a fish, told her she didn't have to go hungry anymore. Her eyelashes fluttered. She opened her eyes, but instead of relief, I saw anger. She slapped me across the face. She told me what happened. Apparently, the previous owner of this body had sold our sister-in-law, Ru, to the Three Li brothers for 3 copper coins. Ru was my older brother's widow. She'd married him at 19, never even got to consummate the marriage before he was dragged off to war and killed. For 3 years, she'd been living alone, barely scraping by, but still kind enough to share her food with Shuang. Right after I'd left to go fishing, Ru came over with a small bag of grain to check on Shuang. The Three Li brothers followed her in, grabbed her, and dragged her away. Shuang tried to fight them off, but she's too weak. One shove sent her into the stool and knocked her out cold. I slapped myself hard. The bastard who used to live in this body was truly subhuman. I grabbed the iron hoe from beside the bed. Shuang flinched and covered her head, thinking I was about to beat her again. I told her I was going to save our sister-in-law, and that from now on I'd protect both of them. Then I ran out into the blizzard. At the Li house I could hear Ru screaming and 3 men laughing behind a side room door. Old man Li tried to block me at the gate, reminding me I was the one who sold her. I shoved past him, kicked the gate open, and he fell in the snow. I smashed the door open with the hoe. Inside, Ru's clothes were torn to shreds. She was down to her last layer, and the 3 brothers were closing in. I lost it completely. I brought the hoe down on the oldest brother's skull. Blood sprayed everywhere, and he dropped. The second brother charged at me, so I stepped back and kicked him square between the legs. He crumpled, screaming. The youngest was only 16. He took one look at the bloody hoe in my hands and backed into the wall, shaking. I pulled off my only coat and wrapped it around Ru. She was trembling so badly she couldn't speak. She just threw her arms around my neck and held on like I was the only thing keeping her alive. I picked her up and headed for the door. The oldest brother got back on his feet, bleeding from his head, and threatened me. Said his family had 4 men and mine only had 1. I stopped and stared him dead in the eyes. I told him that from today, anyone who touches a woman from my family will have to deal with me, and I don't play fair. All 3 of them went quiet. On my way out, Old Man Li tried to stop me again, pointing his bony finger and stammering about broken promises. I kicked him in the chest, and sent him flying. I spat on the ground and told him he was lucky I didn't finish the job. I ran through the blizzard carrying Chin-ru. She was shaking so hard I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or the terror. I felt awful for her, married into my family young. Never even got a wedding night before her husband was dragged off to war and killed. 3 years alone as a widow, with a worthless brother-in-law who sold her for pocket change. Then I heard coughing through the snow. Shuang had followed me out, stumbling through knee-deep drifts in her thin clothes. I yelled at her to go back. She barely had one set of clothes. If they got soaked, she'd have nothing to change into. Back home, I wrapped Chin-ru in our only blanket. I pulled on the torn shirt I'd used to cover her earlier, my lips already turning purple. I was freezing, but I couldn't afford to get sick. If I went down, both these women wouldn't survive the winter. I told Shuang to stay in bed and grabbed the carp to go cook. She just stared at me. A man cooking? In the Dacian Empire, that's unheard of. People would mock the wife for being lazy. Half an hour later I came back with a big bowl of boiled fish, steaming hot. When I turned around, Chin-ru was peeking out from the blanket with one terrified eye, looking at me like I was a bandit. Shuang stepped between us and begged me not to sell her sister-in-law again. I apologized to Chin-ru and offered to kneel. I wasn't actually going to. It wasn't even me who did those things, but I wanted her to see I'd changed. Shuang grabbed me and said I was scaring her, that I seemed like a completely different person. When the fish smell finally hit them, their stomachs growled so loud there was no hiding it. They sat down and started eating, but Shuang picked out all the meat and piled it in my bowl. The two of them were happily sucking on fish bones. When I stared at her bowl, she panicked, thinking she wasn't supposed to eat the bones either, and offered to just drink the broth. I split my fish meat in half and dumped it into both their bowls. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I told them they needed the nutrition more than I did, and I'd go fishing again tomorrow. They still wouldn't eat, so I slammed my bowl down and put on my mean face. What? You don't like fish? Want a fist instead? They both jumped and started eating immediately. Honestly, it seemed like the only way to get through to them was to bark a little. We finished the whole fish, soup, bones, everything. I was maybe 30% full. Then Shuang scooted over and said Chin-ru was too scared to sleep alone after what the Lee brothers did. She suggested she'd sit up all night on watch so Chin-ru could have the bed. It took me a second to realize what she was accidentally suggesting. The three of us sharing one bed. Chin-ru's face went bright red. Shuang finally understood what she'd said and started stammering apologies, looking like a boiled crab. I told them to share the bed, and I'd sleep in the woodshed by the fire. Chin-ru jumped up saying she should be the one to leave, but her torn clothes were barely holding together, and she didn't even have shoes anymore. They were still at the Lee house. I grabbed her wrist, put on my tough face, and told her my brother was gone so I was in charge now, and she'd sleep where I told her to sleep. Then I softened up and said I'm a grown man. I can handle a night by the fire, and we can't exactly fit 3 people on one bed anyway. Shuang went quiet, but Chin-ru bit her lip, her face flushed, and in a voice barely above a whisper said, We can. Outside the wind was howling like knives against the walls. The 3 of us squeezed onto that tiny wooden bed. I lay right on the edge, half my body hanging off. Shuang curled up in the middle with her hand resting on my stomach, like she was checking I was still real. Chin-ru pressed herself into the corner facing the wall. Nobody slept. I stared at the ceiling thinking about how messed up everything was. In this empire, a younger brother taking his dead brother's widow is normal. But the modern part of my brain still resisted. 3 years of war had bled this country dry. Poor people lived like animals, just struggling for a bite of food and a little warmth. Selling your own children was common. I couldn't afford to fall apart. No matter how bad it got, I had to keep going. At dawn I got up before the women and shoveled the snow that had nearly buried our door. When I came back inside, both of them were hiding under the blanket pretending to sleep. I grabbed my old hunting bow and fishing gear and headed out. First I checked the fish trap I'd set the night before. Nothing. The bait was still there, but no fish had gone in. So I decided to push deeper into the mountains with the bow. With an extra mouth to feed now, I had no choice but to take risks. Hunting in winter is brutal. Animals are scarce, you burn through energy fast, and you might run into a starving black bear. Plenty of hunters from our village had died in those mountains over the years, my father included. When they found his body, His guts had been ripped out. I searched all morning and found nothing. My stomach was empty, I was freezing in my thin clothes, and my body was giving out. I was about to head home when I spotted blood in the snow and massive paw prints, bigger than my head. A black bear, and a big one. It was already wounded. I hesitated. If the injury wasn't serious enough, I'd be dead. But then I thought of Shuang and Qinru sitting at home with nothing to eat. If I could kill this bear, we'd have enough meat to last the entire winter. I gambled. I tracked it about 3 miles to a sheltered hollow. The bear was lying on the ground like a black mountain, a horrible gash across its belly with intestines showing. Even half dead, its heavy breathing scared me. My crude arrows couldn't punch through its hide to reach organs, so I needed a different plan. I circled downwind, crept within 10 meters, and shot it right in the eye. The roar shook the whole forest. Snow fell off every tree. The bear thrashed around trying to find me, but I'd already ducked behind cover upwind. It couldn't smell me. That was the whole strategy. Make it move. Make that belly wound tear open wider. Make it bleed out faster. It worked. The snow around it turned red. Eventually, the bear collapsed and stopped moving. But I knew from my past life that bears are smart enough to play dead. I waited half an hour, freezing, until my body was at its limit. Then I circled around to 7 or 8 meters away and shot at its other eye as a test. The arrow hit. The bear didn't flinch. I thought it was finally dead. I pulled out my wood-cutting knife and walked toward it. When I got within 3 meters, I heard a deep, heavy breath. The bastard had taken that second arrow without making a sound on purpose. Its bloody, ruined eyes snapped open. It had smelled me at close range. The bear rose up on its hind legs like a person, roaring so loud my ears rang. I screamed and ran. But nothing outruns a bear burning its last spark of life. I felt a gust of hot, rotten air behind me. Then something like a sledgehammer smashed into my lower back. I flew 5 or 6 meters and slammed headfirst into a pine tree. Everything went spinning. Blood poured down my face. I looked back, barely conscious, and saw the bear dragging its guts across the snow toward me, jaws wide open, coming straight for my head. I woke up screaming. The bear was on top of me, all 400 pounds of it, but its eyes were glazed and its body was already cold. It had died right on me. It was dark. I was alive, but barely. I couldn't feel my arms or legs. My fingers had turned black from the cold. That meant frostbite. If I didn't warm up soon, I'd either die here or lose my limbs. I yelled for help. Nothing answered but the wind. Every breath felt like swallowing broken ice. I thought about Shuang finding out I was dead. That look on her face. And I realized this wasn't just my life. It was 3 lives. Mine, hers, and Qinru's. If I died, they were finished. I clawed my way out from under the bear, inch by inch. When I finally got free, the cold hit me even worse. At least the carcass had been blocking the wind. My fire starter was gone. It was pitch black, and wandering blindly through the mountains at night was suicide. Then I looked at the bear again. Still warm inside. I took my knife and cut open its belly wound wider, just enough for me to crawl in. The stench was unbelievable, but the moment that leftover body heat wrapped around me, I didn't care. I just had to survive until morning. Back in the village, Shuang was losing her mind. She ran barefoot through the snow to Widow Lu's house begging for boots so she could go look for me. Lu went to get the village chief, old Zhao, and he rounded up the men with torches to search the mountain. But the Li brothers were there too. They pushed to call off the search, saying it was too cold and I was already dead. Shuang begged everyone to keep looking. She collapsed in the snow. The village chief told the Li brothers to carry my women home and take care of them. He and Old Li had already made a deal. Once I was confirmed dead, the 3 brothers would take Shuang and Qinru. Old Li slipped the chief 10 copper coins. The chief pretended it was all for the good of the village and the empire's population policy. They were both scum. At dawn, the snow stopped. I crawled out of the bear's belly, steaming in the cold air. I was alive. I couldn't believe it. I looked at that massive bear and knew it was a treasure. I skinned it, butchered the meat, and hid most of it with the fur in a cave I knew about. Sealed the entrance with rocks and snow, then pissed around the area to mask the blood smell from other animals. I threw a whole bear leg over my shoulder and started walking home. At the village entrance, Widow Lu saw me coming, covered head to toe in blood, carrying a giant bear leg. She screamed and fell on her backside thinking I was a ghost. I told her I was very much alive. She grabbed my arm to check. Then her face went serious. She told me I'd better get home fast, because if I didn't, my wife and sister-in-law were about to become Lee family property. My blood went cold. I dropped everything else from my mind and sprinted home. While I was gone, the Lee brothers had already made their move. When I reached the house, Chin-Ru was standing alone at the gate gripping an iron pestle, trying to hold off all 4 Lee men, the 3 brothers, and their old man. The oldest brother was telling her and Shuang to just come quietly to the Lee house since the last man in the Ning family was dead. Villagers stood around watching like it was entertainment, some even cheering them on. The second brother had already grabbed Chin-Ru and thrown her over his shoulder. The oldest was heading inside to get Shuang. Then some kid in the crowd shouted, "Ning Yuan is back?" I walked into the yard covered in blood from head to toe, a massive bare leg on my shoulder, looking like death itself. The second brother nearly dropped Chin-Ru. He put her down fast, and she ran behind me, still trembling. Old Lee tried to smooth things over, saying his boys were just being helpful since women can't survive winter alone. I answered him with a boot to the gut. He flew backwards and hit the ground. The oldest brother grabbed a pestle and charged me. I pulled my blood-soaked knife from my belt. Before it turned into a real killing, Widow Lu showed up with village chief Zhao, who shouted for everyone to stop. Zhao tried to play peacemaker, telling me the Li family meant well and I should calm down. I stared him dead in the face and asked why. As village chief, he was blaming me instead of the men who broke into my home to take my women while I was gone. He couldn't answer that. He knew he was in the wrong. He'd taken old Lee's money and helped set the whole thing up. I stepped toward the oldest brother and asked if he wanted to find out whether his iron bar was faster than my knife. Old Lee told his son to stand down. They left, but the oldest swore this wasn't over. Zhao told me to let it go for the sake of village harmony. I gave him one look, and he practically tripped over himself running away. Chin-Ru told me Shuang was inside. She said my wife had tried to kill herself during the night, said if I was dead, she wanted to follow me to the afterlife. My eyes burned when I heard that. I rushed inside. Shuang was lying on the bed, pale as paper, barely breathing. She looked up at me with empty eyes and whispered, "Husband, are you here to take me? Am I already dead?" I pulled her bony body into my arms and told her neither of us was dead. I told her I was going to feed her until she was plump and healthy, and she was going to give me lots of children. Then Chin-Ru dragged the bare leg inside. When Shuang saw that huge slab of meat, her eyes went wide and she finally burst into tears against my chest. Real tears, the relieved kind. I held her until she calmed down, then told her tonight we were eating meat until we couldn't move. I yelled to Chin-Ru to start the fire. Both women looked at each other and smiled. The moment we started cooking that bear meat, the smell spread across the entire village. Every hungry family could smell it. On a starvation winter like this, that was torture for everyone. Over at the Lee house, village chief Zhao and old Lee sat together stewing in jealousy. They figured I'd only brought back one leg, which meant the rest of the bear was still up in the mountains. The oldest Lee brother had an idea. If they went up and found the remaining meat, they could claim it as theirs. Zhao gave his blessing, saying anything left on the mountain belonged to whoever found it. The 3 brothers bundled up and headed out to search. Back home, I lifted the lid off the pot, and the smell hit us like a wall. Shuang's eyes lit up. Even Chin-Ru, who was still afraid of me, couldn't help crouching by the stove staring at the food. She said she'd be happy with just a few sips of broth. I served them both big pieces. They'd never seen this much meat in their lives. Shuang pushed the biggest piece to me first. She wouldn't eat until I did. So I took a huge bite. The meat wasn't fully tender yet, but the fat and richness of it nearly made me cry. In my past life, I never once struggled for a meal. Now I was getting emotional over bear meat. I told Chin-Ru to eat up and thanked her for protecting Shuang while I was gone. I promised her that from now on, we were real family, and I'd never let her go hungry. Her eyes got wet. She wiped her tears quietly and started eating. When that first bite of oily meat went down, she almost sobbed out loud. After we were stuffed, Shuang heated water for me to bathe. I was still caked in bear blood. I was about to strip down when she glanced toward Chin-Ru, reminding me we had company now. Chin-Ru blushed, thanked me for the meal, and quickly left. Shuang told me to wash up while she got clean clothes. I grabbed her waist and asked if she wanted to wash together. She turned red as a beet, called me shameless, but then bit her lip and whispered she'd wait for me in the bedroom. That was the first time she'd ever said something like that on her own. I was making progress. I soaked in the hot water and started planning. Bringing meat home openly was going to make people jealous. Good thing I'd hidden most of it in that cave. I needed to take some to the county town and sell it. Bear paws and certain parts fetch high prices among rich folk. The fur I'd keep as a blanket. We needed so many things. That afternoon, Shuang and I were together. Afterward, I fell into the deepest sleep I'd had since arriving in this world. She let me rest, got dressed, and went to the river to wash clothes. She never complained. She just quietly took care of everything inside the house while I handled the outside. I woke up later, bladder full, and couldn't find her anywhere. Figured she'd gone to Chinru's place after finishing the laundry. But then I noticed a shadow darting behind the chimney in the kitchen shed. Someone had moved the lid on our big pot. I grabbed the fire poker and shouted for whoever it was to come out. No answer. I moved closer. The figure panicked and tried to rush past me, but they were small and thin. They bounced off me and hit the ground hard. It was a girl named Xiaowan. She was clutching about 5 or 6 pounds of our cooked bear meat to her chest, shaking with fear, staring up at me. The girl on the ground was Xiaowan, maybe 15 or 16, skin and bones, hair dry and yellow from years of not eating enough. Her mother starved to death last year. Her father died in the war, just like my brother. Now it was just her and her 70-something grandmother. She'd smelled the meat cooking and lost her mind from hunger. When I asked what she was doing, she burst into tears and begged me not to report her. Her grandmother had passed out from starvation, and she was desperate. Then she admitted Shuang had actually sent her. My wife had been at the river washing clothes, passed by their house, saw the old woman unconscious, and told Xiaowan to come ask me for food. But when the girl arrived, I was sleeping and she was too scared to wake me. So she just grabbed the meat and tried to run. That's my wife for you, soft-hearted to a fault. We'd barely eaten our first real meal, and she was already thinking about others. I sighed and told the girl to keep the meat. At dinner, Shuang was nervous, waiting for me to scold her about giving away food I'd nearly died for. I didn't. I just asked how the grandmother was doing. Shuang said the old woman couldn't even swallow the meat anymore. Probably wouldn't last long. I told her the girl should find a husband while she still could. That might be her only chance at survival. Shuang agreed quietly and glanced at me with warm eyes. I think she was starting to believe I really had changed. After eating, she curled up against me. Wind screaming outside, but she seemed at peace. A full belly, a warm body, and a man's arm around her. Sometimes that's all it takes. My mind was elsewhere. I had hundreds of pounds of bear meat hidden in that cave, and I needed to figure out how to move it without getting robbed or killed. Hauling it openly to the county town was asking for trouble. In times like these, people's hearts are more dangerous than wild animals. Meanwhile, the Lee brothers had spent the entire day searching the mountain for my stash and came back empty-handed, cursing and freezing. Old Lee sat smoking his pipe and said something clever. I'd have to go back for the meat eventually. All they had to do was watch and follow. Next morning, I headed out early. I told Shuang to cut off some of our cooked meat and take it to Chinru. She begged me to wait a day, still shaken from last time. I pinched her cold nose and promised I'd be back before dark. She packed me some meat for the road and walked me to the foot of the mountain, looking back over her shoulder the whole way home. What I didn't know was that shortly after we separated, 3 shadows slipped into the forest behind me. The Lee brothers were following my tracks. The oldest one was already planning ahead. His younger brother asked what they'd do if I wouldn't hand over the meat. The oldest said people die in these mountains all the time. A slip, a fall, an accident. Nobody would ask questions. The second brother got excited, talking about eating my food and taking my women. That fantasy gave all 3 of them a second wind, and they picked up the pace through the snow. I took a winding route through the mountains on purpose. In times like these, a little paranoia keeps you alive. I looped around the same paths several times, and sure enough, I spotted extra footprints overlapping with mine. Someone was following me. It worked too well on the Lee brothers. I nearly ran them into the ground. The oldest figured out I was leading them in circles, and they were furious, gasping for breath in the snow. They noticed their youngest brother had disappeared, assumed he'd given up and gone home. They decided to stop playing my game and just chase me down directly. What they didn't know was that I'd already doubled back behind them. I watched them stumble off in the wrong direction, chewing on some dried meat. They had bows and knives. My gut was right. They weren't just here to steal. They were planning to kill me out here where nobody would ever know. Once they were far enough away, I moved fast to the cave. Everything was intact. Over 300 pounds of frozen bear meat, perfectly preserved. I wrapped up the 2 front paws and the gallbladder. The paws are loaded with collagen, considered a delicacy among the rich. The gallbladder is even more valuable. My grandfather ran a traditional medicine shop in my past life, so I knew exactly what it was worth. I sealed the cave back up, covered my tracks, and was heading down the back trail when I heard a voice behind me. "Stop right there, Ning Yuan." It was the youngest Lee brother. He hadn't gone home at all. He'd split off and found me on his own. The kid was 16, cocky, used to bullying people under his brother's protection. He swaggered up and yanked the cloth off my basket. When he saw the bare paws and gallbladder, his eyes went wide with greed. He told me to stay put while he dug out the cave. Said the village chief had ruled that anything not inside my house was fair game. He started rambling about selling the paws at some fancy restaurant in town, already spending the money in his head. He turned his back to me and started clearing the snow from the cave entrance. I called his name. He turned around annoyed. I put an arrow through his throat. He dropped to his knees, grabbing at the shaft, choking on blood. He tried to scream for his brothers, but nothing came out except red foam. He staggered 2 steps before my second arrow went through the back of his skull. He hit the ground and didn't move again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the bow. It was the first time I'd killed someone. But I knew if I let him go, the 3 of them would come back together. They'd take everything, kill me, and then Shuang and Qin Ru would have nobody left. I didn't have a choice. I cleaned up the blood, carried the body to a cliff on the backside of the mountain, and threw it over. Watched it disappear into the ravine. Then I sat in the snow staring at my bloody hands, trembling all over. But when I thought about what those men would do to my family, the shaking stopped. I hiked about an hour to Qinghe County, the nearest town. I went straight to the fanciest restaurant, the Yueli Inn. Standing there in my blood-stained rags among all the wealthy customers, I stuck out badly. But the waiter had sharp eyes. He didn't look down on me, just led me to a quiet room in the back. I uncovered my basket. The moment that waiter saw 2 perfect bear paws and a whole gallbladder, his legs gave out, and he hit the floor. He begged me not to leave, then scrambled upstairs screaming for the owner, saying someone had brought top-grade mountain treasures. A fat old man in a thick padded coat came huffing into the back room. Zhang Guangui, the restaurant owner. He tried to play it cool, but the second he peeked under the cloth and saw those bare paws and the gallbladder, I caught the flash of excitement in his eyes before he covered it. He asked my price. I didn't give one. I had no idea what these things were actually worth, so instead I played it smart, told him I was here to make a friend, that I'd bring him first pick of anything. Good I caught in the future, and that I'd heard his restaurant was the fairest in the county. That last part was a bluff to let him know I wasn't completely ignorant of market prices. He offered 70 taels of silver. I nearly choked. I'd been hoping for 15. But I kept my face blank and told him that didn't seem like a friendship price. He flinched just slightly, enough to tell me there was more room. He came back with 85 taels plus 200 pounds of fine white rice. I took it. The rice was exactly what Shuang needed to build her strength back up. Zhang offered to have his men deliver the rice to my village and even pick up future goods directly. That was perfect. I couldn't carry 200 pounds of rice, and walking home with 85 taels of silver was asking to get robbed. I also told him about the 300 pounds of bear meat still hidden in the mountains. He jumped at it. The county magistrate's mother had a big birthday banquet coming up, and he needed meat badly. So I headed back to the village with over a dozen restaurant workers and guards in tow. The villagers saw this procession and panicked, thinking I'd gotten into serious trouble. Widow Lu ran to tell Shuang that a bunch of men had escorted me home. Shuang came out white as a ghost, probably thinking I'd gone back to my old criminal ways. Then she heard me yelling for her to clear out the rice jar. When she saw bags of pure white rice, the kind most villagers had never seen in their entire lives, she almost fainted. I explained I'd sold the bear parts and traded the meat, but I kept quiet about the 85 taels. No need to advertise that kind of money in a starving village. The guard captain quietly posted a few men at my house to keep the neighbors from trying anything while I went back up the mountain with the rest of the crew. At the cave, they hauled out 276 pounds of meat. I kept 30 pounds and the bearskin and sinew for ourselves. The captain told me I could have gotten double the price at the open market. I told him I'd rather take less and stay alive. He looked at me differently after that. When we got back, half the village was crowded around my gate, swallowing hard at the sight of all that meat being carried out. Then a furious voice cut through the crowd. Ning Yuan, where's my third brother? What did you do to him? Old Li and his two remaining sons burst into my yard screaming that their youngest had been missing all night, and it was my fault. The oldest brother told everyone they'd been hunting a badger in the mountains and happened to see me up there too. He said the youngest fell behind and disappeared, and since I was the only other person around, I must have done something to him. I kept my face completely calm. That was the most important thing, not a single flinch. The restaurant guard stepped in front of me like a wall when Old Li tried to grab my collar. The Li family are classic bullies. The second they saw that big man from the city, they backed right off. I spoke up quietly. I said Black Wind Ridge is full of wild animals. Bears, tigers, anything. Maybe their brother just had bad luck and got dragged off by something hungry. Old Li screamed, collapsed, and passed out cold on the spot. The two remaining brothers stared at me, grinding their teeth, trying to find guilt on my face. They found nothing. Village Chief Zhao showed up and immediately started pressuring me, told me to confess if I'd done it. I laughed in his face. I told him everyone knew he and the Li family were in bed together, and he had no evidence, no witnesses, no body. Then I pointed out that he'd better watch himself, because this wasn't the old days anymore. He noticed the restaurant guard standing behind me and changed his tune fast. Suddenly, he was telling the Li brothers to take their father home and stop making a scene. The oldest brother turned to leave and threw a threat over his shoulder, said if I killed his brother, this wasn't over. That was his mistake. I told him to stop. He turned around. I kicked him so hard in the stomach he flew backwards into the snow. Before he could get up, I was on top of him with my bow drawn, arrow pointed at his throat. The whole yard went dead silent. I told him his brother's disappearance had nothing to do with me, but if he ever threatened my wife or sister-in-law again, he wouldn't need to wonder what happened. He'd find out personally. I asked if he believed me. He was shaking so hard he could barely speak. He stuttered that it was just talk, that he'd never touch my family, begged me to let him go. I told him to get lost. He scrambled away on all fours. His brother grabbed their father, and they vanished into the dark. Zhao tried to save face by telling everyone to search the mountain tomorrow. But anyone with eyes could see his authority in this village had just crumbled. People used to fear him because of his alliance with the Li family. Now that I'd torn that arrangement apart publicly, everyone was recalculating. Before the restaurant guards left, the captain pulled me aside. He warned me that I'd shown my wealth and made enemies on the same day, a dangerous combination. I should watch my back against both Zhao and the Li family going forward. I nodded and thanked him. That night, the captain reported everything back to Zhang Quangui at the restaurant. Zhang asked if he thought I really killed the youngest Li brother. The captain said I was young but had more nerve and brains than most men he'd ever met, and that in a place where people are desperate enough to eat their own children, someone like me would do whatever it took to survive. He said I probably wasn't going to stay a simple hunter for long. Then the captain mentioned something else. He'd examined the bear carcass when they retrieved the meat. The cut on the belly was too clean and smooth for an ordinary wood knife. It looked like it had been made by a military-grade curved blade. He suspected I had a real weapon hidden somewhere. Zhang's face went pale. He dropped his teacup. In the Dacian Empire, civilians possessing military weapons was a very serious matter. The captain asked if they should report it to the county authorities. That night we ate white rice for the first time. Shuaing held her bowl like it was made of gold, chewing each bite slowly, tears forming in her eyes. Qin Ru was the same. Back in my old life, rice was the most ordinary thing in the world. Here it was a miracle. I told them to eat more, mix it with the bear meat. Watching them so happy gave me a feeling I hadn't had since arriving in this world, like I was actually doing something right. But while we ate, things were happening I didn't know about. Village Chief Zhao had a secret. His son, a man named Zhao Yi, was supposed to be dead. 3 years ago, when the government came to draft soldiers, Zhao used his connections to get advance warning. He had his son fake his death in the mountains, staged a scene like he'd been killed by wild animals. While my brother and the others got dragged off to die in the war, Zhao's son hid in the mountains and became a bandit. Every month, the son snuck down to bring his father food. That night, he came with half a badger. But when Zhao told him about my bear kill, the son exploded. Turns out he and his bandit crew were the ones who'd wounded that bear in the first place. They'd been tracking it, waiting for it to bleed out, and then it disappeared. They got punished by their leader for losing it, and now they find out I'm the one who finished it off and sold it. The son was furious. He said I was an idiot for trading hundreds of pounds of bear for just some rice when it was worth hundreds of silver taels on the open market. Zhao tried to calm him down, warned him that killing me would risk exposing that he was still alive. But the son grabbed his military saber and said he'd make sure I never came back from the mountains next time. Then he disappeared into the snow. That explained one mystery: the clean cut on the bear's belly that the restaurant guard had noticed. It wasn't from a military weapon I was hiding. It was from the bandit's blade when they first wounded the animal. Meanwhile, I was busy scraping the fat off the bearskin so it could dry properly without rotting. Shuang and Qin Ru moved the remaining 30 pounds of meat into the cellar my brother had dug years ago. It used to sit empty every winter. Now it was full, and I could see real hope in Shuang's eyes. She was already thinking about getting healthy enough to have children. While I was outside, the two women found the bear's private part among the stored items. Qin Ru whispered to Shuang that if she cooked it for me secretly, it would make me extra virile and she'd get pregnant fast. Shuang turned bright red. She was still flustered when she ran straight into my chest as I walked back in. I saw the thing on the ground and understood immediately what they'd been giggling about. But with Qin Ru standing right there, I just changed the subject. I told her to stay the night since it was too dark and dangerous to walk home alone. That night, Qin Ru lay in bed unable to sleep. She kept thinking about how I'd stood up against the Li family to protect her and Shuang. She wondered what it would be like to have a man like that watching over her. Then she remembered what the second Li brother had said, that the law required widows to remarry after 3 years, or the government would forcibly relocate and marry them off to strangers. She started crying quietly under the blanket, feeling like there was nowhere in the world she belonged. Then she heard sounds from the woodshed. Shuang in me. She knew she shouldn't listen, but she couldn't help herself. She pressed her legs together and curled up tight, face flushed in the dark. None of us slept well that night. In the bath, Shuang brought up something I wasn't expecting. She said Qin Ru had been widowed for 3 years now, and under Dakian law, if a widow doesn't remarry after her mourning period, the government can seize her and turn her into a slave, assigned to soldiers or border settlers like livestock. She'd seen what happens to those women. None of them end well. So Shuang asked me to take Qin Ru as a second wife. Give her a place in the family legally, so she'd be protected. My own wife was asking me to marry another woman. I didn't know what to say. In this empire, multiple wives is normal, but I hadn't been thinking about that at all. I told her I needed to think about it, but I'd be lying if I said the image of Qin Ru didn't cross my mind. Later that night, while I was working on the bearskin, it needed proper treatment or it would rot. I heard a noise outside. I grabbed my bow and rushed out. Nobody there, but fresh footprints led away from my yard toward the village edge. I followed them all the way to the river at the base of Blackwind Ridge. The tracks went straight into the mountains. I almost followed, but something stopped me. Last time I went into those mountains at night, I nearly died inside a bear. I turned back. Good thing I did. I didn't know it then, but Zhao Yi, the village chief's bandit son, was hiding in the brush with his saber drawn, waiting for me to step into the forest so he could kill me in the dark. When I turned around, he cursed his luck and slipped back into the mountains. Next morning, I woke up to whispering outside the woodshed. Shuang had already talked to Qin Ru about the plan. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. Qin Ru was refusing. She said she was 22, 3 years older than me, and a widow. She wasn't good enough. She said she was still technically my brother's wife, and people would gossip. She told Shuang to drop it because it would only embarrass me. I backed away from the door quietly. Honestly, Qin Ru was beautiful in a different way than Shuang, softer, more traditionally graceful, with a fuller figure. But I shook those thoughts off. There were more pressing things to deal with. When Qin Ru came out and saw me, we locked eyes for one painfully awkward second. She bowed quickly and practically fled. I told Shuang I was heading to Qinghe County. Zhang Quangui still owed me 65 taels for the bear meat, and I needed to buy supplies. Salt was the priority. Shuang's legs had been swelling, and I knew that was from not getting enough salt for too long. On the way, I stopped at the river and pulled up the fish trap I'd set 3 days ago. 2 fat mandarin fish, maybe 7 or 8 pounds total. That was a welcome surprise. I strung them through the gills and hung them on my belt, then picked up the pace toward town. What I didn't know was that on the hillside behind me, 3 pairs of eyes were watching from the trees. The village chief's son, Zhao Yi, had brought the vice leader of his bandit crew, a man with a scarred face and dead eyes. Zhao pointed me out as the one who'd stolen their bear. The scarred bandit spat on the ground and told Zhao to wait. They'd let me go to town, then ambush me on the way back, right here at the foot of Black Wind Ridge where nobody would see. Quick, clean, no witnesses. Zhao bowed and agreed, staring at my back with murder in his eyes. Walking into Qinghe County with 2 fat mandarin fish hanging from my belt was a mistake. Every merchant and shopper on the street came running, asking to buy them. When I said 2 taels each, they cursed me and backed off. I wasn't really selling anyway. 1 fish was for Shuang and Qin Ru, the other was a gift for Zhang Quangui. Smart business means building relationships. If I kept him happy, he'd give me better prices down the road. Then I hit a crowd blocking the street. People were packed tight around something on the ground. Since I smelled like the mountains, everyone near me scattered, so I ended up right at the front without trying. A little girl was lying on the ground, convulsing, foaming at the mouth. Her grandmother was kneeling beside her, wailing. A young woman pushed through, announcing she was a doctor. She was maybe early 20s, wearing white silk, hair pinned up, skin pale and smooth, clearly from money. She knelt down and checked the girl's pulse, then declared it was acute fright wind, and pulled out a bloodletting needle, ready to stab the girl's forehead. I couldn't watch this happen. She was wrong. I yelled at her to stop. I told her this wasn't fright wind, and that needle would kill the girl. She looked at me, a dirty, sun-darkened peasant, like I'd lost my mind. But I'd grown up watching my grandfather run his traditional medicine clinic. I crouched down and looked carefully. The convulsions were localized, not full body. And when I leaned close, I caught a faint, bitter almond smell. I asked the grandmother what the girl had eaten. She hesitated, clearly trusting the fancy woman over me, but the woman told her to answer. The grandmother said the girl had picked up some wild almonds on the road. Wild almond poisoning. The toxin was attacking her nervous system, mimicking seizures. She didn't need bloodletting. She needed her stomach emptied. I told them to get raw eggs, mung bean powder, and licorice root, boil it together, and pour it down her throat. The egg whites would absorb the toxin. The mung bean would help neutralize it, and the licorice would work as an antidote. My grandfather taught me that years ago. The woman's servant threatened to have me arrested if the girl died. I stood up and said I'd done what I could. Believe me or don't. Then I walked away. Behind me, the woman swallowed her pride and ordered her servants to follow my instructions. Minutes later, the girl vomited up bits of almond, opened her eyes, and started crying in her grandmother's arms. The crowd cheered and praised the woman, but she knew the truth. She sent a servant to find me, wanting to apologize in person. I'd already moved on to the Uli restaurant to collect my 65 taels from the bear meat sale. Bad timing, though. When I arrived, County Magistrate Zhao was there in the back courtyard, personally inspecting the bear meat Zhang had delivered for his mother's 80th birthday banquet. Zhang nearly had a heart attack seeing me walk in while the magistrate was present. Zhang tried to keep me away, whispering to the magistrate that I was just an ignorant mountain peasant who'd embarrass everyone at such an important event. But the magistrate was curious. He wanted to meet the man who'd killed a black bear single-handedly. He told Zhang to bring me in and even ordered a table set for me at the birthday feast. Zhang sighed and sent a waiter to fetch me. There was no arguing with the county magistrate. A waiter pulled me aside before I entered the back room and told me to keep my mouth shut and not ask questions. I saw county guards at the door and figured out who was visiting. County Magistrate Zhao was a sharp-looking man, around 40, with hawk eyes that made you feel small. He asked about the bear. I told him the truth. The animal was already badly wounded when I found it, belly sliced open, guts hanging out. I just finished it off with 2 arrows. He seemed very interested in who had injured it first, and Zhang nearly collapsed with fear when the magistrate pressed the question. Zhang clearly knew about the suspicious knife wound and was terrified of being connected to it. The magistrate offered me a job working for him. I turned it down. I had a wife and sister-in-law depending on me. Zhang scolded me for refusing, but the magistrate waved him off and invited me to stay for the birthday feast instead. When lunch started, I was seated at the worst table, outside in the cold with the servants. I spotted the woman doctor from the market that morning up on the second floor, arm in arm with the magistrate. She was his daughter, Zhao Linger. That explained the silk clothes and the bodyguards. She noticed me too and stared, but couldn't say anything in front of everyone. She sent a servant down with a jug of hot wine and a thank you message for saving the little girl. I poured the wine for the whole table and ate like I hadn't seen food in years. I cleaned out every dish on the table by myself. The servants sitting with me looked horrified. I wanted to take food home for Shuaing and Qin Ru, but I couldn't exactly walk around asking other tables for their leftovers. I went to find Zhang to settle up my 65 taels. He saw me and deliberately looked away. He didn't want me anywhere near his precious magistrate. A servant took me to the back, tossed me a bag of silver, and told me Zhang was done doing business with me. Said I should leave and stop being a nuisance. I swallowed my pride and took it. I told myself the day would come when Zhang Quangue would regret treating me like dirt. I'd barely left the restaurant when everything went wrong behind me. The magistrate's mother, the birthday girl herself, collapsed after drinking a cup of wine. She hit the floor and didn't get up. The most famous doctor in the county was dragged in, took one look at her pulse, and said he had no idea what was wrong. He'd never seen symptoms like this. The magistrate grabbed the doctor by the collar, screaming. His daughter Linger checked the old woman's pulse herself. It was chaotic and weak, eyes rolling back. She started crying because she didn't know what to do either. Then she remembered me. She jumped up and started shouting through the crowd, calling for the miracle doctor she'd met that morning. Zhang put it together. The only hunter at the feast was me. With his restaurant's reputation on the line if the old woman died there, he suddenly became very eager to find me. The magistrate sent every guard he had running into the streets. I could hear them from blocks away, screaming my name. Dr. Ning, save us. I left the restaurant and hit the market. First stop was a clothing shop. The owner took one look at my ragged hunter outfit and tried to send me to a cheaper store. I dropped my bag of silver on the counter, and the clinking shut him up fast. Suddenly I was, honored guest, getting escorted upstairs with tea. I picked out 2 sets of the warmest women's winter clothes and shoes, one for Shuaing, one for Qinru. 6 taels of silver. It hurt, but my women were never freezing through another night. For myself, I didn't buy anything. I'd rather save the money to fix up our house and build a proper heated bed. I bought 5 pounds of coarse salt, some vinegar and soy sauce, and stuffed it all in my basket. I was heading home when I heard shouting behind me. Guards from the county office were running through the streets screaming for Dr. Ning. I stood there watching, amused, wondering who this Dr. Ning was. Then one of them spotted me, and they all rushed over, grabbed me, and carried me back to the restaurant before I could even protest. Inside was chaos. The magistrate's mother had collapsed right after drinking a toast. She was unconscious, barely breathing. The best doctor in the county had already given up. Zhao Linger, the magistrate's daughter, the same woman from this morning, grabbed my wrist with tears streaming down her face and begged me to save her grandmother. The magistrate bowed to me and pleaded. Meanwhile, Zhang Quangue slithered up and whispered that if the old woman died under my care, I'd be the one taking the blame. Then he shoved me toward the patient. That bastard wanted me to fail so the magistrate would hate me and he could wash his hands clean. I was sweating. My medical knowledge was just what I'd picked up watching my grandfather at his clinic in my past life. I was no miracle doctor, but there was no getting out of this. I took a deep breath and checked her pulse. It was slippery but weak underneath. Her face was white as paper, faint crackling sounds in her breathing, cold sweat on her skin. After a moment, I almost laughed with relief. This wasn't some mystery disease at all. It was a stroke. Back in my world, any decent doctor would recognize it immediately. But here in Dakian, a stroke in an old person was basically a death sentence because nobody knew how to treat it. I told the magistrate it was a stroke caused by liver energy surging upward and phlegm blocking the heart pathways. Everyone looked at me like I was speaking another language. The magistrate and his daughter nearly fainted when they heard the word stroke. I calmed them down and said it was still treatable. I borrowed Ling'er's three-edged needle from that morning and pricked the tips of all 10 fingers to release small drops of blood, then did a shallow puncture at the pressure point above her upper lip. Old techniques my grandfather swore by. Within minutes, color returned to the old woman's face. She groaned, opened her eyes, and called her granddaughter's name. Ling'er burst into tears of joy. The magistrate started crying too and tried to kneel before me. I caught him before he went down. I wrote out a prescription for follow-up treatment and handed it to Ling'er. She was shocked that a hunter could write at all, though she clearly thought my handwriting was terrible. I also told her that if the old woman fainted again, blow a tiny amount of ox gallstone powder into her nose to stimulate consciousness. The magistrate begged me to come to his residence for a proper thank you. Then I saw my opening. I glanced over at Zhang Quangue, who was dripping with nervous sweat, and sighed loudly. I said I appreciated the invitation, but unfortunately missed her. Zhang had made it clear earlier that someone of my low status didn't belong here and had asked me to leave. So I supposed I should go? Zhang's fat face went white. The magistrate turned on him with fury, demanding to know how he dared disrespect the man who'd just saved his mother's life. Zhang practically crawled over and begged my forgiveness, calling himself a blind fool. He offered 100 taels of silver as an apology. Ling'er asked me to stay too, looking at me with those big, curious eyes, clearly fascinated by a dirty hunter who could perform medical miracles. I sighed and said it was never about the money. I just had a simple, humble healer's heart. Then I held out my hand and asked Zhang what he was waiting for. 100 taels was 100 taels. Zhang Quangue was kicking himself. He'd bought my bare meat and paws at rock-bottom prices, planning to use them to earn favor with the magistrate. Instead, I'd walked away with the magistrate's gratitude, 100 taels of his money, and he'd managed to offend both me and the magistrate in one afternoon. Beautiful. He handed over the 100 taels personally. Combined with the 65 from the meat and the 85 from before, I was carrying a fortune. In a place where a strong man earns 20 or 30 copper coins for a full day's labor, this was life-changing money. Magistrate Zhao's daughter Ling'er invited me to their residence for a proper thank-you dinner. I declined politely, saying the old woman needed rest and my wife was waiting for me at home. The magistrate understood and made me promise to visit once his mother recovered. After they left, Zhang suddenly became my best friend. He called me Dr. Ning and talked about how I was destined for great things now that the magistrate owed me a favor. I wanted to spit in his face, but the mature part of me knew better. Instead, I flattered him, told him the magistrate should really be thanking him, since none of this would have happened without Zhang bringing me to the feast in the first place. He actually bought it and cheered right up. As I was leaving, Zhang ran after me with a package of fancy pastries from the capital for my wives to try. Then he called over his head guard, a tall, dark-skinned man named Zhou Qiong, and ordered him to escort me home safely. Zhou Qiong wasn't happy about it. On the road, he barely said a word. I asked if I'd done something to offend him. He stopped and stared me down with those fierce eyes. He said Zhang paid his wages and gave him a roof, so his job was to protect Zhang's interests. Then he asked if I truly didn't know why Zhang had turned cold on me. That caught me off guard. He clearly knew something I didn't, maybe about the bear's knife wound and what Zhang's people suspected. But he wouldn't say more, just told me to walk faster before sunset. What neither of us knew was that Zhao Yi and his bandits had been waiting in ambush along the Black Wind Ridge Trail all day, freezing in the snow. The moment they spotted figures coming from the direction of town, Zhao Yi got excited and pointed us out to his vice leader, a scarred, dangerous-looking man. The vice leader didn't hesitate. He pulled out a military-grade bow, nothing like my crude hunting weapon, and drew a steel-tipped, armor-piercing arrow. He drew it to full tension and let it fly. The arrow screamed through the air and punched clean through someone's chest. The figure stumbled one step and collapsed face-first into the snow. Didn't move again. Zhou Qiong dropped right in front of me. 1 second we were walking. The next he was face down in the snow with an arrow sticking through his chest, blood spreading out like a red flower. I threw myself behind a rock and pulled my bow. My hands were shaking. I called out to Zhou but got nothing back. The arrow that hit him was military-grade, armor-piercing with blood grooves carved into the head. This wasn't bandits with homemade weapons. Someone had real military equipment. Then Zhou's voice came, barely a whisper through blood. He told me to be careful, that the shooter was using a military longbow with a range of 200 to 300 paces. The arrow had missed his heart and gone through his lung instead. He was playing dead because he knew a skilled archer always follows up a missed kill shot with one to the head. Up on the slope, the scarred bandit vice leader was waiting with his bow drawn, watching for me to come out and help Zhou so he could kill us both. But I wasn't going to play his game. I left my basket propped against the edge of the rock, so it looked like I was still hiding behind it. Then I crawled backwards on my belly and circled around the hillside to come up behind them. When I reached the top, I saw 3 men staring at my basket. The vice leader was closest, bow still aimed. I had only 2 arrows, both just sharpened wood with no metal tips. I had to hit soft spots, the neck. I aimed at the vice leader first. Just as I drew, he sensed something wrong. He started to turn. Our eyes met across 20 paces. I released. The arrow went through his throat. He grabbed at it, blood pouring from his mouth, and fell. The second bandit dove for the longbow on the ground, but my second arrow caught him in the right eye. He screamed once and went still. That left Zhao Yi, the village chief's son. He was on the ground swinging his curved sword at nothing, screaming threats about his 100-man gang coming for revenge. Then he scrambled up and ran into the darkness. I was out of arrows. If he'd turned and fought, I would have died right there. I searched the 2 bodies. I took the military longbow, a quiver full of real steel arrows, and the curved saber. When I ran my finger along that blade, everything clicked. This was the weapon that had cut open the bear's belly, not some secret military weapon I was hiding. These bandits had wounded the bear first, and I'd stumbled onto their kill. That's why Zhang turned cold on me. His guard had seen the clean cut on the bear and assumed I had an illegal military blade. Zhang was afraid of being connected to someone possessing forbidden weapons. No time to think about that now. Zhou was dying. I strapped the weapons to his unconscious body and heaved him onto my back. He was enormous, easily over 6 feet tall and heavy as stone. Every step through the snow was agony, but every minute I wasted was a minute closer to him bleeding out in the cold. Shuang and Qin Ru were standing at the village gate, frozen with worry. When they saw me staggering toward them dragging a bloody man, they screamed and ran to help. We got Zhou onto the bed. I cut open his blood-soaked coat. The arrow was buried deep in his right chest. It had missed the heart, but almost certainly punctured his lung. In a world with no hospitals, no antibiotics, no surgical tools, a wound like this was a death sentence. I told Shuang to get boiling water and stoke the fire, but keep the door cracked for airflow. She was panicking, but did everything I said. Qin Ru brought a pot of boiling water. I ripped up one of my old shirts and threw it in the water to sterilize it. They'd never heard the word sterilize before, but didn't question me. I gripped the arrow shaft. No anesthesia, no proper instruments, no real confidence I could save this man. I closed my eyes, clenched my jaw, and ripped the arrow out. Blood and tissue sprayed everywhere. Qin Ru caught a faceful and fainted on the spot. Zhou launched upright from the pain, let out one horrible scream, then collapsed unconscious again. I ripped the arrow out and blood sprayed from Zhou's chest like a fountain. I pressed my hand over the wound and screamed at Shuang to wring out the boiled cloth. She plunged her hands straight into the scalding water without hesitating, her fingers turning bright red, and handed me the cloth. I slapped it over the wound and made her press down hard while I grabbed more strips. I was so panicked I stuck my own hand in the boiling water too, nearly blacked out from the pain, but I got everything I needed and wrapped his chest tight. It was deep into the night by the time I finished. Zhou was unconscious, white as a ghost, barely breathing. I'd cleared some of the blood from his lung, but with no real medicine or clean supplies. Infection was almost guaranteed. Whether he lived or died was up to fate now. Then I noticed Shuang's hands. Both palms were burned raw from that boiling water, and she hadn't said a word about it. I felt terrible. When I'd shouted at her during the emergency, I'd seen the fear flash across her face. She'd been reminded of the old me for a second, but when I apologized, she looked stunned. She said a husband should never apologize to his wife, that people would laugh at me. I told her anyone who laughed could answer to me. I got out our jar of bear fat and rubbed it gently on her burned palms. She squirmed a little, blushing, but held still. I told her not to touch water for a few days to avoid infection. She didn't know what infection meant. Nobody in this empire understood germs. People died from dirty wounds every day without knowing why. I cooked the 2 mandarin fish I'd brought back, this time with soy sauce and vinegar, real seasoning for the first time. The smell woke Qin Ru from her faint and drifted through the whole village, probably making every neighbor curse my name. When Qin Ru asked why the fish tasted so different, I just smiled and told her to try it. She took a bite and understood. She'd never tasted soy sauce or vinegar in her life. Nobody in these villages could afford such things. Qin Ru did something that caught my attention. Before eating, she picked the best piece of fish belly and placed it in my bowl. The room went quiet for a beat. Shuang blinked. Qin Ru realized what she'd done and turned red. Serving a man his food first like that, that's a wife's gesture, not a sister-in-law's. I pretended not to notice, picked the piece up, and fed it to Shuang instead. After dinner, I checked Zhou's pulse. Weak, but stable. I fed him half a bowl of warm fish soup. Then came the sleeping arrangements. I needed to watch Zhou all night, so the women had to sleep at Qin Ru's place. Problem was, the old me had stolen her blanket months ago and sold it. So I gave them the bearskin to use as a cover. Then I pulled out the package from my basket. Shuang opened it and gasped. 2 brand new sets of thick winter clothes with padded shoes. She held hers against her chest, eyes shining, and nearly tackled me before remembering Qin Ru was standing right there. Qin Ru watched with a sad little smile, happy for Shuang but clearly feeling like an outsider. Then I pushed the second set toward her. This one's yours. She stared at me, then at the clothes, her lips trembling. I get one too. Her voice cracked. She looked like no one had ever thought of her before. I walked her home carrying the bearskin. Her house was even more wrecked than ours. Wind tearing through the paper windows, bed ready to collapse. I spread the fur on her bed, turned to leave, and told her to get some rest. I had 1 foot over the threshold when 2 arms wrapped around me from behind. I froze. I could feel her pressed against my back through her thin clothes, shaking. She buried her face between my shoulder blades. Ning Yuan, if you don't mind, I can give you children. I stood there in the snow while Qin Ru held on to me from behind, shaking, waiting for my answer. The silence stretched on. I could feel her starting to lose hope, her arms slowly loosening, ready to pull away and pretend none of it happened. I grabbed her hand before she could let go. I turned around and told her, not as her brother-in-law, but as a man, that if she'd have me, we'd build a life together. I'd take my brother's place and make sure no one ever hurt her again. 3 years of loneliness, fear, and grief came pouring out of her at once. She buried her face in my chest and sobbed until my shirt was soaked through. I just held her and patted her back. This woman was only 22. In my old world, she'd have men lining up for her. Here she'd been starving, terrified, and alone. Then her crying slowed down, and her hands started wandering across my back. Clumsy, hesitant, but the meaning was clear. She looked up at me, bit her lip, stood on her toes, and closed her eyes. Every rational thought left my brain. I scooped her up and carried her to the bed. She covered her eyes with her hands but peeked through her fingers, trembling with anticipation. Shuang had apparently told her about the ear-biting thing, and she was curious. Then the bed collapsed under us with a spectacular crash. We hit the floor hard, me landing right on top of her. She winced in pain but still managed to whisper, face burning red, "Do we keep going?" I looked at the wreckage, laughed bitterly, and told her we'd have to wait. Zhou was back at my house possibly dying, and Shuang was waiting. More importantly, I needed to tell my wife first. It had to be done right. I left Qin Ru leaning against the cold wall, biting her lip, clearly still wound up. Back home, Shuang met me at the door. Before I could even figure out how to bring it up, she smoothed my collar and asked with a sly little smile, "Is it about sister-in-law? Did you too? Bite ears yet?" The little schemer. She'd been orchestrating this the whole time. I pointed at her, half angry, half laughing. She hugged my arm and said if it were any other woman, she'd never allow it. But Qin Ru was kind and had suffered too much. She genuinely wanted them to be sisters, looking after each other. I held her tight. This wife of mine was so selfless it made my chest ache. I walked both women to Qin Ru's house and fixed the broken bed while they waited. Told them to share the bearskin and get some sleep. When I glanced at Qin Ru on my way out, she was already looking at me. We both looked away instantly, ears burning. I went home alone to watch over Zhou. The fire crackled. My eyelids grew heavy. Then the door creaked open. Ru slipped in, dressed in the new winter clothes I'd bought her, hair carefully pinned up, neck bare and white in the firelight. She crouched beside me and put a cool hand over my mouth before I could speak. From that angle, I could see exactly why every man in the village had been obsessing over her. She was breathtaking, face flushed scarlet. She whispered that since she was mine now, she should do her part for this family. She took my hand and led me to the woodshed next door where the dry hay was stacked. There was no fire in there. It was freezing. Neither of us cared. That night, even the wind seemed to know better than to disturb us. Next morning, Shuang and Ru told me to get some rest. They'd look after Zhou. When Ru called me husband for the first time, both women caught each other's eye and burst out laughing at the state of me. I won't go into details, but let's just say Ru's quiet exterior hit a side I was completely unprepared for. I needed to recover. That afternoon, Zhou finally woke up. I told him what happened. 2 bandits dead, 1 escaped. I showed him the captured weapons. He barely glanced at the arrows before confirming they were standard military issue, likely from deserters out of Blackwater border fort, about 100 miles away. I asked if we should report this to the magistrate and send soldiers to wipe them out. Zhou shook his head. He said the claim of hundreds of bandits was a bluff. The entire border garrison only had a few dozen men. But a few dozen desperate outlaws with military weapons was still extremely dangerous. Then Zhou insisted on leaving immediately to report to the magistrate himself, despite his wound. He told me not to leave the village under any circumstances. The surviving bandit would have gone back to report, and they'd be watching the roads for me. I tried to stop him, but he threw on my coat and a straw hat and limped out into the snow until I couldn't see him anymore. I felt guilty watching him go. Truthfully, I didn't want to make that dangerous trip myself. I had people to protect now. But Zhou was doing it with a hole in his lung. Back inside, I spent the rest of the day sharpening the captured arrows on a grinding stone. The armor-piercing tips were a bit heavy, which limited their range. I filed them lighter and sharper. With this military bow and my accuracy, I'd have a real weapon now instead of that toy hunting bow. I lost track of time. Shuang and Ru had reheated dinner 3 times before they finally came to get me. After eating, things seemed quiet, so I figured the bandits wouldn't come tonight. I told the women I needed to go grab the bearskin from Ru's house. I gave them both a look that said warm up the bed, tonight we'd all be together. They scolded me playfully but went inside to wash up. I walked over to my brother's old house and pushed open the door. The bed where I'd left the bearskin was completely empty. Someone had stolen it. I knew exactly who. Over at the Lee house, the 2 remaining brothers were admiring their prize behind locked doors. The oldest figured it was worth at least 20 taels, the second said 50. Old Lee, now bedridden from the stroke after I'd kicked him, was directing things with his crooked mouth, telling his sons to sell it fast before I came looking. Then a voice called from outside the gate. A man said he was a traveling merchant buying mountain goods at high prices. Old Lee was thrilled. The sooner they got rid of the evidence, the better. They rushed to invite the stranger inside. A huge man ducked through the door, nearly 6 feet tall, broad as a bear, wearing a straw hat and a rain cloak. He spotted the bearskin on the bed and walked over to examine it. His big rough hand stopped on one specific spot on the belly, right where the original knife wound had been. The oldest Lee brother got impatient and demanded a price. The man took off his hat, revealing a thick beard and a face full of menace. You killed 2 of my Black Wind Ridge brothers, and you're bold enough to sit here, showing off the evidence. Old Lee realized too late what was happening. Before anyone could move, a curved saber flashed from under the cloak and sliced across the old man's throat. Blood sprayed across the room like a fountain. Tonight, the bandit said, every one of you dies. I was crouching outside the Lee house when I heard a scream from inside. The door burst open, and the second Lee brother came tumbling out covered in blood, screaming for help. Through the wall cracks I saw old Lee's head hanging limp off the bed, already dead. Inside, the oldest brother was clinging to a huge man's legs, yelling for his brother to run. It was the bandits. They'd come down from the mountain. The one who escaped yesterday must have gone straight back and told them everything. But something didn't make sense. Why did they go to the Lee house first instead of mine? I didn't realize it then, but it was the bearskin. The Lee brothers had stolen it, and the bandits tracked it right to their door. I ran home, kicked the door open. Shuang and Ru were in bed half undressed, waiting for me. I told them to get dressed immediately and follow me. No time to explain. I helped them pull on their new cotton coats with shaking hands and led them to the hidden cellar behind the house, the one my brother had dug years ago for storing winter food. I pushed them down inside and told them not to come out no matter what they heard. Shuaing grabbed my sleeve, teeth chattering, begging me not to go out there. I peeled her fingers off gently, told her they'd be safe, and sealed the cellar shut. I covered the entrance with straw and brush until it was invisible. Back inside, I strapped the captured saber to my waist, slung the military bow over my shoulder, and grabbed the quiver of sharpened arrows. I crawled to a position about 250 paces from the cellar entrance where I had a clear view of the house and the surrounding area. If anyone came near my women, I'd see them. In the village center, it was hell. The bandits had dragged dozens of villagers into the open and forced them to their knees in the snow. Torches everywhere. Crying, begging, screaming. Widow Lu got dragged out by her hair and thrown into the crowd. Then the bandit leader walked out of the darkness, a massive man, nearly 9 feet tall, carrying 3 severed heads by the hair. Old Li and both his sons. He tossed them on the ground like garbage. He was wearing my bearskin across his shoulders. He told his men to kill all the men and take the women back to the mountain. Village Chief Zhao crawled out of the crowd on his hands and knees, grinning and bowing, telling the bandit boss that his son Zhao Yi was one of them. He begged to be spared his family. The bandit leader exchanged a look with his men. Zhao smiled wider, thinking he was saved. Then a blade flashed, and Zhao's head rolled across the snow and stopped at little Xiaowan's feet. Her scream drew the wrong kind of attention. The bandit who'd killed Zhao spotted her and decided he wanted her. The leader told him to go ahead. The man ripped the girl's clothes open. Her grandmother threw herself at the bandit's legs, crying that Xiaowan was just a child. He slit the old woman's throat without even looking. Xiaowan screamed for her grandmother, clawing at the bandit's face. He slapped her unconscious and started forcing her legs apart. Every man in the village was kneeling with his head down, too terrified to move. I was 250 paces away, flat on my belly in the snow, watching through the dark. I knocked an arrow on the military bow, drew it back, calculated the wind, and released. The arrow crossed the distance in a heartbeat and punched clean through the bandit's throat. My first arrow killed the bandit on top of Xiaowan. The second caught another one through the chest as he was climbing off Widow Lu with his pants down. 2 dead in seconds. The bandit leader screamed, and his men fired a storm of arrows into the dark toward my position. They peppered the mud wall behind me, but their aim was terrible. When they stopped to reload, I ran out and pulled their arrows from the wall, free ammunition. They fired again, and I ducked back. These guys couldn't shoot. That evened the odds. The leader sent 3 men with swords after me. I knew this village in the dark better than they ever could. I disappeared. Back in the center, Widow Lu grabbed Xiaowan and hid behind the other villagers. The girl whispered, asking who had saved her. Lu covered her mouth and muttered that only that little bastard Ning Yuan could shoot like that. The bandit leader overheard. He walked over with his saber at Lu's neck and asked if this Ning Yuan was the one shooting arrows. Lu tried to deny it, but then some old man from the village stood up and sold me out. Told the leader exactly where I lived, described my 2 beautiful wives, even offered to lead the way. The bandit leader stabbed the old man through the chest from behind. Said he hated disloyal rats. The man was useful information, but disgusting as a person. Then he forced Lu to lead them to my house instead, threatening to kill everyone and let his men take turns on her if she refused. They found my house empty. The leader asked Lu where the cellar was. She swore she didn't know, but her face gave her away. They threw her to the ground and pinned her hand down, threatening to chop it off. She screamed and passed out from fear. Then the cellar cover flew open. Chinru climbed out, lips trembling but eyes steady. She told them to leave Lu alone, that she was the one they wanted. The bandits' eyes went wild when they saw her figure. The leader asked about the second woman. Chinru glanced behind her without thinking, and one of the bandits dove into the cellar and dragged Shuaing out. He threw her on the ground and straddled her, reaching for her clothes. I put an arrow through his throat from the darkness. The remaining bandits scattered for cover. The leader was sharp, though. He immediately drew his longbow and aimed it straight at my 2 wives. He shouted into the dark, calling me impressive, saying he used to be a military commander of 1,000 men. Then he told me to come out, or he'd kill both women right there. Shuang and Qin Ru held each other tight. Both of them shouted the same thing at the same time. Don't come out. Go get help. In our next life, we'll be your women again. I dropped from the tree I'd been perched in 100 meters away. Set down my bow. Walked out into the open. Hey, your grandfather is right here. Picking on women doesn't make you tough. Come at me if you've got the guts. The bandit leader looked me over and, instead of killing me, offered me a job. Said he admired my archery and my guts. Joined his gang on the mountain. Wine, meat, gold, women, whatever I wanted. His men were furious, screaming that I'd killed their brothers, but the leader ignored them. The whole time, his bow stayed aimed at Shuang and Qin Ru. Then came his real condition. He said I needed to prove loyalty with a joining gift. I had to choose one of my women for him to kill on the spot. The other one could come with me to the mountain. Qin Ru stepped forward, shaking, and told me to pick her. She said it was her fault for giving away the cellar. Shuang threw herself in front of Qin Ru and said to choose her instead, that Qin Ru had just found a home and deserved to keep it. Listening to both of them beg to die for the other tore me apart. One of the bandits couldn't take it anymore. His little brother was the one I'd shot through the throat earlier. He cursed his own leader and charged at me with his saber, screaming for revenge. Then an arrow came out of nowhere and punched through the side of his neck. He dropped face first into the snow. A war horse screamed in the darkness. A soldier in gleaming silver armor came charging out of the night on horseback, spear raised. Right behind was Zhou Qiong, pale as death but alive, bow in hand. He'd actually made it to the border garrison and brought back real soldiers. Zhou fired a second arrow at the bandit leader's face. The leader was experienced enough to roll sideways behind my yard wall. Then he popped up behind the broken wall with his bow aimed at me. But I was faster. I drew and released in one motion. My arrow buried itself in his gut. I already had the second one knocked, aimed at his head. He knew he was done. He threw himself backward through the woodshed door just as my second arrow punched into the wood where his face had been a split second earlier. The remaining bandits saw the silver-armored commander and the border cavalry and scattered into the forest like rats. The commander shouted to chase them down and leave none alive, then spurred the horse straight at the woodshed. The warhorse kicked the rotten door to splinters, but the leader had already punched through the back wall and disappeared into the snow. Zhou climbed off his horse with help, clutching his chest wound. He looked at the bandit corpses scattered around my yard, and then at me, barely scratched, and shook his head in disbelief. He said even in his prime, he wasn't sure he could have done what I just did, held off over a dozen combat-experienced deserters alone, and kept his family alive. I asked him about the soldiers. Their equipment was far too good for a county garrison, real military longbows, sabers, warhorses. Zhou told me now wasn't the time. He wanted me to go inside and rest. I didn't move. I started picking up scattered arrows from the ground, one by one, sliding them back into my quiver. I told him the bandits knew Black Wind Ridge like their own backyard. The border soldiers didn't. In a nighttime blizzard on unfamiliar mountain terrain, there was no way they'd catch every last one. And any survivor who escaped would come back for revenge against my family. I couldn't live with that threat hanging over us. Shuang screamed at me not to go. Let the soldiers handle it. But I looked at both my women one last time and turned toward the mountain. If I wanted them to ever sleep peacefully again, I had to end this tonight. I moved fast through the freezing dark, following footprints and blood drops in the snow. These bandits had lived on this mountain for years. They'd know hidden paths and shortcuts. But so did I. Then I heard a woman's voice cut through the wind ahead, sharp, commanding. Stop. You can't escape. I looked down the slope and froze. The silver-armored commander was on foot now, chasing the wounded bandit leader up the mountainside with a spear. And under that helmet, the commander was a young woman. The bandit leader was bleeding badly from my arrow but still moving fast, ducking into a hidden trail he knew by heart. His plan was to reach the mountain fortress where he'd have the advantage. I followed his tracks through the blizzard. I spotted him leaning against a massive old pine tree, pressing his wound. I fired from about 300 meters out. He dodged on pure instinct, years of battlefield experience, and threw himself behind the trunk. The arrow buried itself in the snow right where he'd been standing. He laughed from behind the tree and called out to me. Said we had a strange kind of fate. Even the armored soldiers couldn't catch him, but somehow I'd found his secret path. He tried to negotiate, promised his gang would never set foot in Mo village again if I let him go. I didn't answer, just drew again. He tried a different angle, said we'd both freeze to death out here, and his women were safe, so why risk everything? I finally spoke. I told him I might freeze, but he'd bleed out first. We'd see which happened faster. He cursed and reached for his own bow. My third arrow slammed into the exact same spot on the tree trunk, showering him with snow. At that range, he couldn't even see me clearly, let alone shoot back. His courage broke. He screamed for me to come fight like a man instead of hiding. I said one word. Too late. Then he understood what I'd been doing. My first 4 arrows weren't misses or warnings. Each one hit the same point on the tree, digging deeper into the wood, weakening the trunk's protection inch by inch. The 5th arrow, tipped with a steel armor-piercing head, punched clean through the damaged wood and out the other side, straight into his throat. He grabbed at the shaft, choking on blood, eyes wide with disbelief. I walked out of the snow toward him. He looked at me, and I think he saw something of himself, a young man with talent, but born in the wrong place at the wrong time. He died with a bitter smile in the snow. I pulled the bearskin off his body and headed home. The female general in silver armor found the scene shortly after. She examined the tree trunk. 5 arrows clustered in nearly the same hole, and couldn't believe it. She said even with her lifelong training, she couldn't match that precision at 50 paces, let alone 250. When I walked through my front gate, Shuang and Qinru slammed into me so hard I nearly fell over. They held on like they'd never let go. I wiped their tears and told them it was finished. Zhou Qiong asked if I'd gotten the leader. I nodded. He said with my skills and nerve, I could make military commander within 3 years. Then he trailed off, looking troubled. Hoofbeats broke the silence. The silver-armored general rode into my yard with 2 soldiers, dropped the bandit leader's head on the ground, which made both my women scream and hide behind me, and stared me down. She took off her helmet. Long black hair spilled out in the wind. She had sharp features and the kind of authority that made you stand straighter without thinking. She asked if I was the one who killed the bandit chief. I played dumb and said I was just a hunter. Obviously, she was the one who got him. She smirked and pointed at the bearskin lying in my yard, the same one that had been on the dead man's back in the mountains. I looked at it, slapped my own forehead, and muttered a curse. I'd been so careful about everything else and forgot about the one piece of evidence I'd carried home like an idiot. She waved at her soldiers and said, "Take him back to camp. Talent like this doesn't grow on trees." Then she looked me dead in the eyes. "This general has her eye on you." The female general ordered her soldiers to seize me. I pushed Shuang and Qinru behind me, ready to fight. I knew what this was, forced conscription. The border garrisons were short on men, and she wanted my archery skills. Before I could do anything stupid, Zhou Qiong dragged himself up and planted his broken body between me and the soldiers like a wall. The soldiers yelled at him to move. He dropped to one knee instead and begged the general to let me go. He called himself by his old rank and mentioned he'd served in the Guangdong Military Command's 3rd banner. The general's eyes went cold. She told him he had no right to even speak that name and threatened to arrest him too. Zhou didn't flinch. He said I'd saved his life, that I had a wife and a concubine who depended on me, and that dragging me away would be a death sentence for my whole family. Then he said the words that made my chest tighten. "If the border needs a man, I'll go in his place." I almost stepped forward and volunteered myself. The words were right there in my throat. But I looked back at Shuang and Qinru, white-faced and clinging to each other, and I couldn't say them. I'm not from this world. I don't care about military glory or empire building. I just want to keep my people safe. After a long, terrifying silence, the general spoke. She told Zhou to heal his wound. He had 3 days to report to the army camp 100 miles past Blackwater City. Then she kicked her horse and vanished into the snow without looking back. Her soldiers glared at Zhou, then rode after her. The second they were gone, Zhou collapsed. I caught him before he hit the ground. When he woke up the next morning under the bearskin, I'd been sitting by the fire all night sharpening arrows, unable to sleep. He told me not to feel guilty. He said he had no family, nobody waiting for him, so going to the border was nothing, just repaying a debt. I asked him about the general. He laughed bitterly. Turns out he'd served under her father years ago in the military command. He was a good soldier, but had no head for politics. got drunk at a celebration banquet, offended the wrong people, had his achievements stolen, and got framed. Someone with old loyalties spared his life, but kicked him out of the military and dumped him in Qinghe County to rot. That's how he ended up as a restaurant guard. Shuang came in with hot porridge, saw Zhou was awake, set the bowl down, walked over, and dropped to her knees. She knocked her forehead against the floor 3 times. Zhou was startled. She looked up with red eyes and said he'd saved her husband, which meant he'd saved her whole family. She had nothing to give him except her gratitude. Zhou told her to get up, said the best thanks would be for us to live well and have children and be safe. We walked him to the crossroads 3 miles outside the village. He stopped and turned around, slapping my shoulder hard. He told me he'd had a family once too, a wife just as good as mine, and a daughter. Then he cut himself off, swallowed whatever was rising in his throat, and waved it away. I pulled out nearly everything I had, over 200 taels of silver, and pushed it into his hands. Told him the border was brutal and he'd need supplies. He laughed, shoved the money back, and called me an idiot. Said to spend it on my wives. Then he turned and walked into the blizzard, back straight, alone. Shuang and Qin Ru leaned against me watching him disappear, eyes wet. They said he was the best man they'd ever met. I said he was the best person I'd encountered since arriving in this world. The women looked up at me confused by that phrasing, but I didn't explain. 3 days later, I went to Qinghe County with warm clothes and dried meat I'd prepared for Zhou. At the restaurant, Zhang told me Zhou had already left, alone, on foot, a full day early. My stomach dropped. The deadline was 3 days. He left after 1. He wasn't rushing to serve. He was rushing to die. A man with a punctured lung, walking 100 miles through winter mountains to a frozen border garrison, alone. He didn't expect to make it. He just didn't want me to see him fall. While I stood there feeling sick, a bright, familiar voice rang out behind me. "Dr. Ning, it's you. You're finally here." It was Zhao Linger, the magistrate's daughter. She jumped off her carriage the moment she spotted me, practically bouncing over in her red cotton coat with a puppy in her arms. She kept calling me, "Dr. Ning," no matter how many times I told her to stop. She said her grandmother had been taking my prescription and was doing much better. She invited me onto her carriage to visit the old woman. I declined. A man and an unmarried woman riding together would start rumors. She blushed when she realized and let me walk alongside instead. At the Zhao residence, the old woman's color had returned nicely. Her pulse was stable. She insisted I stay for a meal. While we waited for the magistrate, Linger asked who taught me medicine. I said it was just family remedies and self-study. When I offered to share some knowledge with her sometime, her eyes lit up and she nearly jumped out of her seat before catching herself and hiding behind her grandmother, ears turning red. The old woman started asking my age and family situation. I saw where this was heading and answered carefully. 19, no parents, brother dead in the war, already married. The room went quiet. I caught the light dimming in Linger's eyes. The magistrate arrived and took me to his study. I asked about Zhou Qiong's past. He seemed surprised I wasn't asking for favors. He told me what he could. Zhou had offended someone powerful in the military command. His wife and daughter were killed. He was exiled to Qinghe County. That's all the magistrate would say. My heart sank. No wonder the big bearded soldier had looked so alarmed when Zhou volunteered. Once Zhou re-entered the military system, the powerful people he'd crossed would find him. He wasn't going to serve. He was going to die. He knew it when he walked away from us in the snow. Then the magistrate changed the subject. He asked if I wanted some criminal women, prisoners from conquered nations that the empire distributed to men for breeding purposes. Each village had a quota. He suggested I take a few home. I turned him down flat. I already had 2 wives and a tiny house. Besides, these women weren't free. You had to pay a population fee. Regular ones cost a fortune. Noble-born ones from fallen kingdoms could cost thousands of taels. One rumor said a capital aristocrat paid 10,000 gold pieces for a captured royal concubine. I wasn't spending my savings on that. Linger came to call us for dinner looking deflated. She'd obviously heard I was already married. I understood. She was young and full of romantic ideas about love conquering all. In a few years, she'd realized that a county magistrate's daughter and a mountain hunter lived in different worlds. So I kept my distance. She was untouchable, and her father would never allow it anyway. After dinner, I made one last request. If Sho ever came back through the county with a supply convoy, please send word to me. The magistrate agreed. Walking out, I passed the front of the government office. A line of prison carts stood there, filled with shivering women in thin clothes. Some looked terrified, others completely numb. These were the criminal women being distributed across the county's villages. I glanced over and was about to keep walking when my eyes locked onto a tall woman in the last cage. Her hair was a mess, but there was something unmistakable about the sharpness in her face, the way she carried herself even in chains. She looked up. Our eyes met. Her face went white with shock, and she quickly dropped her head. My heart nearly stopped. It was the female general, the one in silver armor who'd tried to conscript me, the commander from Blackwater Border City. She was sitting in a prisoner's cage, dressed in rags, being shipped off as a criminal woman. It's you, General. What are you doing here? I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The woman in the prisoner's cage looked exactly like the female general who'd tried to conscript me 3 days ago. A court officer noticed me staring and sidled up. He confirmed it. Xie Hongyi, Xue Hongyi, daughter of the Guangdong military commander. Last month, the entire command got swept up in a political purge at the imperial court. Her father was beheaded. The women of the household were sold off, most sent to brothels. The general herself was stripped of rank and shipped out here as a criminal woman to be given to whatever man would take her. 3 days ago, she was commanding soldiers on horseback in silver armor. Now she sat in a cage in torn clothes. The officer kept talking, making disgusting comments about her legs and suggesting I take her home. He said if I didn't, she'd end up in some remote village being used by filthy old men. Xue Hongyi was shaking, biting her cracked lip until it bled, staring at the floor. I turned and walked away. I felt bad for her, but I couldn't save everyone. Back home, I told Shuang and Qin Ru about the general's fall. Qin Ru's hand trembled. She'd come from a merchant family that was destroyed the same way, property seized, men dragged off to war on false charges. She understood exactly what that woman was feeling. She squeezed my hand tighter, grateful that I'd saved her from the same fate. Then Xiaowan showed up at our door, shivering in her torn clothes. Her grandmother had been buried after the bandit attack. She was completely alone now. Several men had come offering to marry her for a bowl of grain, but she'd refused them all. She knelt in front of me and begged me to take her in, said she'd work as a servant, eat almost nothing, do anything. I told her no. I wasn't being cruel. I just couldn't take in every stray. We had food now, but who knew how long it would last? I wasn't a charity. I had to think long-term about my family. Shuang and Qin Ru exchanged a look, but didn't argue. They knew I was right. Xiaowan left without another word, the last bit of hope gone from her eyes. That night, the three of us were in bed together. Shuang mentioned quietly that she'd heard someone from a neighboring village had, bride-snatched, Xiaowan. A blind old man had carried her off. Both women pressed closer to me. They were grateful to be safe, but worried about the girl. Then I heard a noise in the yard. I grabbed my bow and ran out half-dressed. In the hay pile by the cowshed, I found Xiaowan. Her face was bruised and swollen. Before she could explain, torchlight appeared at the gate. A bald, yellow-toothed old man with a limp came storming in, swinging a rattan switch and screaming at her. He started whipping her right there in my yard, one lash after another across her arms and back, tearing her sleeves open, drawing blood. She curled up on the ground, protecting her face, but didn't scream. When he got tired, he grabbed her ankle and started dragging her toward the gate, saying he was taking her home to consummate the marriage. I stepped in and told him she was from our village and he couldn't treat her like an animal in front of us. He looked me up and down, said she was his wife and he could beat her however he wanted. Then his filthy eyes drifted to my window where Shuang and Qin Ru were watching. He licked his lips and suggested we swap women. Said Xiaowan was still a virgin and he'd trade her for a night with one of mine. His eyes stuck on Qin Ru. The next thing he felt was the cold steel tip of my arrow pressing into his sweaty throat. I told him if he looked at my women one more time, he'd die right here. The old man stumbled backward and fell in the snow, terrified. I told him if I ever saw him in Moa village again, I'd kill him. He reached toward Xiaowan, ordering her to follow. I put an arrow into the snow an inch from his crotch. He screamed and scrambled away on all fours, shouting threats about his village coming for revenge. I told Shuang to bring the girl inside. I wasn't thrilled about it. But I couldn't just let that happen in my own yard. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days, because she hadn't. Last time I'd given her meat, she'd fed every bit of it to her dying grandmother and kept nothing for herself. In a world where people kill each other over a mouthful of grain, that kind of selflessness gets you killed. I sat by the fire watching her eat with her knees pressed together, sneaking frightened glances at me. Everyone was waiting for my decision. I made up my mind. You can stay, but I don't keep people who don't work. It'll be hard. If you don't want that, you can leave now. She jumped up instantly, eyes alive for the first time. Said she wasn't afraid of hard work. I told Chinru to clean out the old room behind the cowshed, the one where my mother used to live before she died. Chinru practically dragged the girl out before I could change my mind. Shuaing brought over a brand new quilt, bright red and thick. When Xiaowan touched it, she started crying. She'd never felt anything so warm. She walked to the doorway and kowtowed 3 times toward me. The 2 women gave her hot water, cleaned her wounds, and shared the fancy pastries Zhang had given me. Xiaowan had never seen pastries in her life. She took tiny bites, tears running down her face, saying she wished her grandmother could have tasted something this sweet before she died. Next morning, I woke up to the sound of scraping outside. Xiaowan was already up in the freezing cold, shoveling snow from the yard in her thin clothes. When she saw me, she apologized for being too loud. I went back inside without a word, then came back out and shoved one of Chinru's new padded coats into her arms. She tried to refuse it, saying she couldn't take her sister-in-law's clothing. I told her to either put it on or get out. I wasn't feeding someone who'd freeze to death being polite. She flinched but took it. I could see she wasn't hurt by the harsh words. She understood. Underneath the roughness, she knew what I was doing. Back inside, both my women were watching me with those knowing smiles. Shuaing asked why I always scared the girl when I was clearly being kind. I reached under the warm blanket and pressed my cold hands against her chest to warm them. She let me without flinching. I told her that if I was gentle about it, Xiaowan would feel like charity and never be comfortable. But if I made it seem like she was earning her keep, she could hold her head up. That was the only way she'd truly feel at home. Shuaing looked at me like I was the best thing that had ever happened to her. I hoped I could keep deserving that look. That morning I grabbed my bow. The women packed dried meat, and Xiaowan stood in the yard wearing her new coat, finally not shivering. I told her we were going up the mountain. She grabbed the quiver and supplies and followed me toward Black Wind Ridge without hesitation. I took Xiaowan up Black Wind Ridge to the spot where I'd killed the bandit chief, the old pine tree with the arrow hole still dark with blood. Behind it was the hidden trail he'd been trying to escape through. It cut straight into the mountain. I figured it led directly to their hideout. The tunnel took about 15 minutes to cross. When we came out the other side, the view opened up into a vast snow-covered valley surrounded by peaks. Xiaowan spotted the bandit fortress in the distance. I pushed her down flat and told her to wait at the tunnel entrance. If she saw anyone, run. Don't look back. I crept up alone with my bow. The place was abandoned. General Shue's border soldiers had already swept through and cleared it out. Blood on wooden posts, wreckage everywhere, but no bodies and no people. I watched for half an hour before going in. The fortress was bigger than I expected. Multiple buildings, and deep inside the mountain was a fully equipped cave system. Storage rooms, living quarters, everything. It was like a self-contained little world hidden inside the ridge. The soldiers had taken anything valuable, but the heavy furniture and structures remained. This was exactly what I needed. A secret base. Somewhere to stash food and silver away from the prying eyes back in the village. I'd noticed people from our village and neighboring ones lurking near my house lately. Word of the bear had spread. My home wasn't safe for storing wealth anymore. Then I heard an animal cry from deeper in the valley. I followed the sound to a rocky clearing and nearly had to clamp my hand over my own mouth. Deer. An entire herd of them, grazing right there in the open. So that's where they'd all gone. For years, hunters had wondered why the deer population around Black Wind Ridge had vanished. They'd migrated to this hidden valley, which is also why the bandits never ran out of food despite being stuck on a mountain. I drew my bow and put an arrow through the fattest one's eye. One shot, clean kill. I rushed in with my knife and finished it off. 100 pounds of prime venison. Deer meat tastes better than bear. The skin was valuable too, but what I really wanted was the blood. Deer blood is rich in minerals and salt compounds. My women had been showing signs of salt deficiency, swollen legs, and weakness. Deer blood could help until I found a better source. Then I noticed something strange about the ground. A large area had been dug up. No vegetation grew there at all, completely bare compared to everything around it. I knelt down and picked up a white chunk of rock. Touched my tongue to it. My whole body went rigid. Salt. Natural salt deposit. A whole mine of it, right here in the mountain. That's why the deer congregated here. Animals seek out salt licks. That's why the bandits thrived for years. They had their own private salt supply. My hands were shaking. If I could refine this into proper salt, my family would never lack for it again. But I forced myself to calm down. In the Dacian Empire, salt production is a government monopoly. Private salt making is treated the same as treason. They'll execute your entire family. I could use it secretly for ourselves, but I could never sell it or tell anyone. I buried that excitement deep, hefted the deer onto my shoulders, and headed back toward the tunnel. What I didn't know was that someone had been watching me the entire time from a hidden position nearby. After I left, she walked out to the salt deposit, picked up a piece of rock, and tasted it herself. She smiled coldly and muttered something about me looking honest, but having bigger ambitions than I let on. I came back to the village at dusk with 100-pound deer on my shoulders. Every widow and old woman in Moa village came pouring out to stare. Widow Lu nearly fell over when she saw it, shrieking so loud they probably heard her in the county seat. I told her I'd give her a leg. She grabbed Xiaowan and made the girl repeat it just to be sure she wasn't hearing things. Then she latched onto me like a shadow, terrified the offer would disappear. Back home, Shuang and Qinru were already cooking rice. Qinru had been planning to stew the bear's private parts to boost my stamina. Apparently my two wives had been worrying I was wearing myself out at night. Sweet of them, I suppose. I dropped the deer in the yard, and the crowd pressed in. I slit its throat and drained the blood into a basin. That was the most valuable part for us. Deer blood is packed with minerals and salt, and both my women had been showing swollen legs from salt deficiency. Then I skinned and butchered it right there in front of everyone. I tossed Lu her promised leg. She hugged it like a baby, eyes darting around suspiciously like someone might snatch it. She called me a living saint, better than the dead village chief, and waddled home as fast as she could. The rest of the village stared at the remaining meat with wolf eyes. Xiaowan whispered that showing this much food openly was asking for trouble. She was right, but I had a plan. I stood up and announced that every household in Moa village was getting a share. The crowd surged forward. Xiaowan jumped in front of me, spread her arms, and yelled at everyone to form a line or get nothing. They obeyed instantly. That girl was already earning her keep. I gave away everything except the blood and 2 hind legs. Within an hour, smoke was rising from every chimney in the village, and the smell of cooking meat filled the air for the first time in years. It almost felt like the old festival days. Shuang asked me over dinner why I'd given so much away. I told her that being the only family with food makes you a target. Share it around, and people feel grateful instead of jealous. What I didn't say was the deeper calculation. If everyone in the village had some strength in their bodies, they'd be more willing to stand together if outsiders came looking for trouble. And most importantly, I'd found the Deer Valley and the salt mine. I had a renewable source now. I could afford to be generous. That night, I'd just bathed and drunk warm deer blood. My whole body was burning with energy, and both wives were waiting in bed. Then gongs started clanging outside. I pulled on a coat and went out. Government officers had come from the next village over, gathering everyone in the square. Lu went pale. Last time they showed up banging drums, it was to drag men off to war. The lead officer announced that a dangerous prisoner had escaped from the criminal women transport. A former border military commander named Shuehangi. He said she was highly skilled in combat, had killed countless enemy soldiers, and ordinary men were no match for her. Anyone who spotted her should report immediately. My stomach tightened when I heard her name. Just days ago she'd been in that cage at the county office. Now she'd broken free. I kept my face blank, turned around quietly, and went home. After the officers left and their torches faded down the road, I didn't know that up on Black Wind Ridge, Shuehangi was standing on the mountainside watching them go, curved saber in hand, eyes cold as steel. She looked down at my house one more time, her lips curling into a thin smile, then disappeared into the mountain tunnel. She knew about the salt mine. She'd watched me discover it. And now she was living in the abandoned bandit fortress that I'd been planning to use as my secret base. I left before dawn, telling Qin-ru not to wake Xiaowan. She'd earned her rest. But the real reason was different. What I was about to do carried a death sentence, and I barely knew the girl. I couldn't risk it. At the mountain tunnel entrance, I spotted something that made me freeze. A scrap of dark green fabric caught in the thorns. That material was worth more than most villagers earned in a lifetime. Ordinary people didn't wear it. Combined with last night's announcement about Shui Hongyi escaping, I had a pretty good idea who was hiding inside. I went in anyway. I needed that salt. On the other side, I spent 2 full hours lying in the snow watching the bandit fortress for any sign of movement. Nothing. Either she'd left or she was better at hiding than I was at looking. I decided to take the risk. I hauled a 40-pound chunk of salt rock back to the fortress and got to work. Crushed it into powder with the back of my knife, dissolved it in water, let the sediment settle, filtered it through layers of cloth, then boiled it down to crystals. The whole process took most of the day. The result wasn't great, still a bit bitter, but it was already better than anything you could buy at market. I sprinkled some on my remaining deer meat and ate. The difference was incredible. I figured the problem was not enough ash for the chemical process and too few layers of cloth for filtering. Next time I bring more supplies. Maybe even borrow some of my wife's undergarments for finer filtering. The tighter weave would work better. I was so pleased with myself, mentally planning improvements, that I completely dropped my guard. Something slammed into the back of my skull. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was tied to a wooden plank, spread-eagled on the ground. A familiar cold voice asked me where I'd learned to refine salt. Shui Hongyi was sitting by a fire in the corner of the cave, roasting my leftover deer meat on her saber and tasting my salt. She was wearing a dark green robe, hair tied up high, looking every bit the warrior, except now she was a fugitive instead of a general. She said the salt wasn't bad. Then she asked why I wasn't screaming. I told her she was the one who should be worried. She was a runaway criminal. If caught, they'd break her legs. The word, criminal, hit a nerve. She stormed over and pressed the blade against my neck, telling me to say it again. I didn't back down. I told her the Shui family was finished. Her father had been beheaded, and I knew she had a brand on her chest. Every criminal woman gets the character for guilty burned into her skin with a hot iron. Under Dacian law, branded women rank lower than merchants, lower than livestock. Her lips were bleeding where she'd bitten through them. She was shaking with rage, but I could see the pain underneath. She raised the saber over my head and said she'd changed her mind about needing my help. She was going to kill me. I stared up at her and said if she'd wanted me dead, she would have done it while I was unconscious. She needed something from me, and we both knew it. The blade hung in the air above my neck. I clenched up when she swung that blade down, but it stopped 3 inches from my throat. I let out a breath and switched to my friendliest voice. I told her if she killed me, my wives would report me missing and the whole mountain would be crawling with soldiers by morning. We were at a stalemate. I knew her secret, she knew mine. Neither of us could afford to blow the other up. She wasn't stupid. She'd been watching me since I entered the tunnel that morning. She'd noticed the cloth I'd wrapped around my feet to hide my tracks, and how I'd waited 2 hours in the snow before moving. She admitted those skills impressed her. I asked what she wanted. She laid it out simply. She'd keep quiet about my illegal salt operation if I kept quiet about her hiding place. Don't bother her, and she wouldn't bother me. I agreed immediately. She got suspicious at how fast I said yes. I pointed out that if I'd wanted to turn her in, I could have brought soldiers at dawn. She accepted that but warned me. If I broke my word, she'd come down from the mountain and kill my entire family before they caught her. I stood up to leave, then stopped. She was wearing nothing but a thin silk robe in the middle of winter on a frozen mountain. I took off my padded coat and tossed it on the table, told her to take care of herself because getting sick up here could kill her. She reached for the coat and collapsed. Her eyes rolled. She broke into a sweat, and she crumpled to the ground. I checked her forehead. She was burning up with fever. I found some herbs nearby that I thought might help reduce the temperature. Wasn't sure they'd work, but I boiled them into a dark green soup and tried to pour it down her throat. She was unconscious, but still clenched her jaw shut. Everything I poured in came dribbling back out. I looked at her lips, looked at the medicine, looked at her lips again. I stood up formally, bowed to her unconscious body, and announced out loud that I was absolutely not the kind of man who takes advantage of a helpless woman. What I was about to do was purely medical, no disrespect intended. Then I took a mouthful of the medicine, tilted her head back, and pressed my mouth to hers to force the liquid down her throat. Her eyes snapped open. She saw my face an inch from hers, felt the liquid sliding down, and in one explosive motion, slapped me so hard across the face I saw stars. I sat there holding my swollen cheek while she huddled in the corner, face bright red, looking like she wanted to murder me and die of embarrassment at the same time. She demanded to know why I'd kissed her. I told her I was saving her life. She said she never gave me permission. I called her crazy, grabbed my bow, and told her she could die alone for all I cared. I stormed out, but left my coat draped over her. Once outside, I didn't actually leave. I waited by the cave entrance and listened. After a while, I heard her get up, walk to the pot, and pour herself a bowl of medicine. She drank it despite the bitterness. Then it was quiet for a long time. I'd left my rice balls on the stone table with a message scratched in charcoal. Being alive matters more than anything else. As long as you're breathing, there's hope. Your family would want to see you living well. Let them rest in peace knowing you're okay. Through the cave walls, I heard Shue Hongi start sobbing. Not the controlled, angry kind. The deep, broken kind. The sound of someone who'd been holding everything together finally letting go. That's when I walked away. She needed that release. People have to let the grief out before they can think clearly about how to keep living. On the walk home, I thought about my own past life. My parents divorced. My grandfather died. They left me sports cars and empty mansions. I sighed to myself. Apart from being rich, I had absolutely nothing. How tragic. Back home, I mixed my half-finished salt into a pot of deer stew. Shuaing tasted the broth and her eyes went wide. It wasn't bitter like regular coarse salt. Chinru noticed too, having grown up in a merchant family. She asked where I got it. I told them I'd traded a wild chicken to a passing merchant. They bought it. The stew was the best thing any of us had ever eaten. That night while my wives fussed over me, I couldn't stop thinking about Shue Hongi alone in that freezing cave with a raging fever. I wondered if she'd survive the night. Next morning, I went back up. When I touched her forehead to check her temperature, she woke up swinging her saber at my throat. Even half dead with fever, her reflexes were terrifying. I put down some food and left her alone to go work on the salt. This time I figured out the missing piece. I mixed in a specific type of clay powder to absorb the impurities before filtering. When the water boiled down, what was left in the pot were fine white crystals, real salt. I brought some to Shue Hongi and asked her to taste it. She'd grown up wealthy and knew what quality salt was. She touched a crystal to her tongue and her eyes went wide. She couldn't believe I'd actually done it. I was so excited I started dancing around the cave like an idiot. She told me to shut up and let her rest. I tried to check her fever again. She exploded, grabbed her saber and screamed that if I touched her she'd kill me. She remembered the mouth-to-mouth medicine incident from yesterday. I told her she was being ridiculous and if she didn't let me help, she'd die. She said she didn't trust folk remedies and told me to get lost. Fine, I said. Not my problem. I turned to leave. She collapsed face first on the stone floor behind me. I sighed, walked back, picked her up, and carried her to the wooden bed. Then came the hard part. My folk remedy for breaking a stubborn fever involved treating pressure points on the back and neck, which meant I had to open her clothes. I untied her waist sash carefully. Her robe slipped off her shoulders, revealing. Well, everything was wrapped tight in cloth bandages, but even bound up like that, the sight nearly knocked me over. I forced myself to focus and worked on the pressure points along her spine and neck. When she woke up later, she immediately noticed her sash had been retied differently and felt the stinging on her back and neck where I'd worked. Her weapons were on my side of the cave, and her arms and legs were bound to a plank so she couldn't attack me again. She asked what I'd done. I told her I'd saved her life. She asked if I'd opened her clothes. I admitted I had, but swore I hadn't done anything inappropriate. She went completely berserk, screaming she'd kill me, thrashing against the bindings, tears of humiliation in her eyes. She'd gone from commanding armies to being tied up and undressed by a village hunter. I understood her rage, but I couldn't exactly let her die. I turned my back to let her calm down. That was a mistake. The ropes snapped like thread. This woman was inhumanly strong despite looking half-starved. She launched herself at me like a missile, knocked me flat on the ground, locked her hands around my throat, and grabbed a rock to bash my skull in. I had exactly 1 second to think. I'm dead. The rock came down at my face. I threw my arms up and braced for the impact. It missed. She'd slammed it into the ground right next to my head. Xue Hongyi was still straddling me, hair hanging down like a curtain, sobbing so hard the whole cave echoed with it. Big heavy tears rolled off her face and splashed onto my chest. I lay completely still, afraid any movement would set her off again. After what felt like forever, I cleared my throat and told her I swore on everything I hadn't touched her inappropriately. All I did was scrape her neck and back with a flat edge, a folk technique called gua sha that helps break a fever by bringing blood flow to the surface. She looked confused, so I pointed out that she'd been crying with impressive lung power for quite a while now. And wasn't her head feeling clearer than before? She paused, considered it, and realized I was right. The headache and fog had lifted. She moved to the fire. I kept my distance. It was getting late. Snow was coming down harder. I needed to leave before the mountain paths became impassable. Then she stopped me. I tensed up, expecting another attack. Instead, she asked me to sit next to her. I did, reluctantly. The silence between us was painfully awkward. She'd just tried to kill me with a rock, and now we were sitting side by side like old friends at a campfire. Then she said something I never expected. In a voice so quiet I almost missed it, she asked, "Can you hold me?" My brain short-circuited. I was absolutely certain this was a trap. She'd wait until my arms were around her, then snap my neck or gut me with a hidden blade. Before I could refuse, she fell into me, just collapsed against my chest and buried her face in my shoulder. The cave went completely silent. I could hear both our heartbeats. I understood then. This wasn't romantic. This wasn't a trick. Her entire family had been executed. She'd gone from commanding armies to being branded like cattle. She was alone in a frozen cave with a fever that might kill her. She just needed to feel another human being's warmth to remind herself she was still alive. I put my hand on her back and patted it gently. Didn't say a word. Sometimes there's nothing to say. On the way home, I thought about my own past life again. Divorced parents who threw money at me instead of affection. The only person who genuinely loved me was my grandfather, and when he died, I was truly alone. The women who stayed were there for the money. I'd forgotten how I survived those darkest days. But looking down at the flickering lights of Moa Village, I felt the heaviness lift. I had a real home now. Real people who cared. That was more than I'd ever had in my previous life. I picked up my pace and disappeared into the night. What I didn't know was that after I left, 3 men crept out of the shadows. The crippled old man from the neighboring village, the one whose throat I'd put an arrow against, had been following me. He'd been watching for days, suspicious of how I kept bringing home meat. He and 2 scrawny men from his village tracked my footprints back to the mountain tunnel. They found the cave entrance and argued about whether to go in. The 2 others were terrified there might be bandits inside. They could see firelight. The old man insisted the bandits had all been killed or captured, and that this was probably my secret hunting camp. The firelight was just a trick to scare people off. He limped inside. The other 2 hesitated, then followed. They hadn't tasted meat in over a year. Hunger won over fear. They had no idea that the firelight they were walking toward belonged to a former military commander who'd killed more men than they could count, and who was in no mood for visitors. While I was away, Widow Lu had been at my house stirring up trouble, warning Shuang and Qin Ru that a capable man like me would eventually stray. My women handled it beautifully. Shuang laughed and said even at my worst, I'd already been worse than anything Lu could imagine, and now life was better than she'd ever dreamed. Qin Ru said as long as I kept this family in my heart, nothing else mattered. They'd noticed my coat was missing and the scratch marks on my face from Xue Hongyi, but neither said a word. In this world, a man with means taking multiple wives was normal. I'd never hit them, never starved them, and worked myself half to death keeping them fed. They weren't going to start a fight over a few scratches. Xiaowan came in and shut Lu down cold. Told her if she had nothing guilty on her conscience, she wouldn't flinch at a loud noise. Lu took the hint and left. At dinner, Qin Ru placed a whole stewed bear part in my bowl, the one she and Shuang had been saving to boost my stamina. Both women turned red and couldn't look at me. Xiaowan sat there chewing her rice, completely clueless about what was happening. Then Xiaowan mentioned something that made me freeze mid-bite. The crippled old man from the neighboring village, the same one I'd threatened with an arrow, had gone up Black Wind Ridge that morning with 2 other men. They hadn't come back. I knew exactly what had happened. They'd followed my tracks to the tunnel. which meant they'd walk straight into Shui Hongyi's hiding place. I said nothing, told everyone to eat and go to bed. Other people's fate wasn't my problem. That night, after the women and I were done, Shuang lay on my chest tracing circles with her finger and casually mentioned we should expand the house after spring. She said 5 people couldn't fit in this tiny place. I sat bolt upright. 5? Who's pregnant? Both women laughed. Nobody was pregnant yet. They were just planning ahead. I said I'd been thinking the same thing. We had the money to apply for a building permit in the county and register our expanded household. Next morning the mountain was snowed in, so I decided to go fishing instead. I was just heading out with Xiao Wan when a crowd of people blocked my gate. A big, loud woman leading the group, the wife of one of the missing men, started screaming at me. She said her husband and his brother had followed me up the mountain yesterday morning and never came back. She accused me of killing them. I laughed in her face, asked her since when Black Wind Ridge belonged to her village, and why her husband's disappearance was my problem. Xiaowan stepped up too, pointing out that snowstorms and wild animals kill people on that mountain all the time. The woman wasn't interested in logic. She said the crippled old man had a grudge against me, so obviously I must have murdered them all. Then she got to her real point. She was pregnant with her husband's child, and since her man was gone, I owed her compensation. She demanded half the meat and rice from my cellar. So that was the game. They saw my family eating well and came to shake me down using a dead man as their excuse. I turned around and walked back inside without a word. They all stood there confused. Then I came back out with my military longbow, and 3 arrows knocked on the string, aimed straight at the crowd. You want my food? Fine, come take it. Who's first? The pregnant woman's face went white when she saw my bow, but she didn't back down. She said they had a dozen people, and I couldn't kill them all. Then a skinny young man scaled my wall from the side and rushed me from behind, screaming for the others to charge in and grab the food. I spun and put an arrow through his foot before he reached me. He collapsed screaming at my feet. That should have ended it. Instead, it made things worse. These people were so far past starving that fear didn't work anymore. They rushed the gate like animals. A bony middle-aged man got within 3 steps before I kicked him square between the legs. He went down howling, but they kept coming. Hunger had eaten their minds. I realized this was more dangerous than the bear, more dangerous than the bandits. Starving humans have nothing to lose. I yelled for Xiao Wan to get inside and bar the door. She ran in, but instead of hiding, she grabbed the captured military saber and planted herself in the doorway, shielding Shuang and Qin Ru behind her. Then I heard hoofbeats. Fast ones. A massive man on horseback came flying into my yard, jumped off, and started grabbing villagers and hurling them through the air like sacks of grain. Border soldiers followed, sabers drawn, blades at throats. It was Zhou Qiong. He'd come back. I couldn't believe it. Minutes later we were inside by the fire, and he was laughing that big laugh of his, drinking hot water. He explained he'd been sent back from the border on orders to hunt down deserters. Soldiers were fleeing Blackwater City because the food was terrible, the cold was unbearable, and spring would bring a massive enemy offensive. The deserters were becoming as dangerous as bandits. I asked if the rumors were true, that one enemy horseman could take on 5 of our soldiers. Zhou looked embarrassed and said on horseback, a trained enemy rider could handle 10 of our infantry. That hit me hard. I knew things were bad, but not that bad. Zhou got serious. He said he'd passed through the neighboring village on his way here and seen things no person should see. People eating people. That's what starvation had done. That's why he'd detoured to check on me, and he'd arrived just in time. He told me to be extremely careful. When things got this desperate, human beings became worse than any wild animal. Before leaving, he rode his horse in front of the kneeling villagers and roared at them, told them I was his sworn brother, and if anyone touched my family again, he'd personally drag them to the front line and throw them at the enemy. They scrambled away on their hands and knees. He promised that border patrols would increase in the area, and if Blackwater City ever fell, he'd send someone to warn me so I could evacuate. I thanked him and offered to help hunt the deserters if he needed me. He grinned, told me to save him a drink, and rode off into the snow with his men. Shuang came out and brushed the snow off my shoulders. Her voice was shaking when she asked what Zhou had seen in the neighboring village. I looked at the blood spots in the snow where I'd shot that kid's foot and said it plainly. People eating people. I didn't eat. I grabbed my bow and went to the hill overlooking River Ditch Village. What I saw made my stomach turn. A door flew open, and the same young man I'd shot in the foot that morning came limping out, screaming for help. A group of men from the village tackled him and dragged him back inside. They were going to eat him. I'd spared his life by only shooting his foot, but his injury made him the weakest one in the village, and that made him food. I ran home. At my gate, an old woman from River Ditch Village was kneeling with her grandson, begging Shuang for a bite of food. Xiaowan was blocking the door, suspicious. I stepped in front of my wife and told the woman we had nothing to spare. She sighed, took her grandson's hand, and shuffled away. 50 steps out, she stopped. She turned and looked back at Shuang with a gaze that made my skin crawl. Empty eyes that flickered with something hungry and hateful for just a second. Then she pulled a black cloth bundle from her coat and unwrapped it. A chunk of dark, strange-looking meat. She pushed it into the boy's mouth and told him to eat. Shuang screamed. I clamped my hand over her eyes and pulled Xiaowan inside. Slammed the door shut. The plague of cannibalism had spread across a dozen villages and reached the county seat. Magistrate Zhao was horrified, but his officers were just local militia. They caught petty thieves, not crazed cannibals. His wife finally reminded him that the border army was obligated to help maintain local security. He slapped his own leg for forgetting and rode out to find the soldiers. That night nobody in Moa village dared open their doors. Xiaowan was too scared to sleep alone and crawled into bed with Shuang and Qin Ru. I sat on a stool sharpening my saber all night, planning to move everyone to the mountain fortress at dawn if things got worse. Then a scream tore through the village. I saw torchlight moving toward my house. I shoved all 3 women into the cellar, sealed it with straw, and hid nearby with my bow. The torches stopped at my gate. I was ready to kill. Then I recognized the first figure through the door. Zhou Qiong. He'd come back with 6 soldiers. Minutes later my house was lit up and secured. Soldiers at every corner, one guarding the door while my women cooked. Zhou sat across from me and explained. The magistrate had found him and asked for help dealing with River Ditch Village. Zhou had already handled it. Anyone who resisted was killed. The rest were arrested and sent to the magistrate. But then he told me something that stunned me. He'd slaughtered all 6 of his unit's horses and distributed the meat to the worst-hit villages. Killing military horses was a capital offense. I told him that. He shrugged and said if someone had to take the blame, he'd carry it alone. His life hadn't amounted to much anyway. I went quiet. This empire was rotten from the inside. Court officials fighting each other while the people at the edges starved to death and ate each other. Different dynasty, same disease. Zhou grinned at me and asked if I wanted to go see what the cannibals from River Ditch Village looked like up close. Said people who'd eaten human flesh looked different from normal people. I waved him off. I'd seen enough from the hilltop to give me nightmares. He laughed that big laugh of his, grabbed my arm, and dragged me outside anyway. Zhou dragged me outside to look at the captured River Ditch villagers. They were kneeling in the snow, hands on their heads. He told a soldier to yank up the pregnant woman's face, the same one who'd led the mob to my house that morning. She looked different. Her lips were unnaturally red, her eyes cloudy and yellow. It had only been a few hours, but something about her had fundamentally changed. I couldn't put my finger on it, but standing near her made my skin crawl. Zhou asked what would happen to them. He said under Dacian law, they should be executed, but they'd never make it to the capital for trial. They'd die of illness on the road, and their heads would quietly disappear. The empire couldn't afford to let news of cannibalism reach the emperor's ears. Officials in the capital would bury this scandal to protect themselves. Back inside, Shuang served hot soup. Zhou took one sip and froze. He looked at me with sharp eyes and asked where the salt came from. It wasn't coarse salt. He could taste the difference immediately. Shuang innocently said I'd traded for it with a traveling merchant. Zhou's face went dark. He pulled me to the back door. He told me refined salt was one of the most controlled substances in the empire, right up there with sugar. Only the imperial household controlled the production method. Anyone caught making it privately would be beheaded along with their entire family. He said I was playing with fire while holding my own head in my hands. I admitted I'd made it myself because my women were getting sick from salt deficiency. He grabbed my arm and told me to rush back to the kitchen and dump coarse salt into the pot meant for his soldiers. If any of them tasted the difference and reported it, we were all dead. Then his serious face cracked into a grin. He asked me to pack him a small bag of the good stuff before he left. Said he'd just lick it now and then as a treat. I almost fell over laughing. Chinru was nearly in tears when I got to the kitchen. She'd realized her mistake and was already offering to take the blame if we got caught. I told her to stop talking nonsense, dump in the coarse salt, stir it up, and act natural. We got through dinner without anyone noticing. When Zhou left with his soldiers and the prisoners, I slipped him a small cloth bag, some silver coins, and a pouch of salt. He squeezed my hand, smiled, and marched off into the snow. But then things took a turn I never saw coming. On the road, Zhou's soldiers were complaining about having to escort the prisoners all the way to the county seat. They suggested killing them on the spot to save time. Zhou stopped walking. He stared toward Black Wind Ridge. His soldiers drew their weapons, sensing danger. An arrow came screaming out of the darkness and punched through the lead soldier's throat. The prisoners scattered into the night. 3 soldiers charged toward the shooter's position on the hillside. But Zhou didn't follow them. He exchanged a look with 2 soldiers who stayed behind, and they quietly walked in a different direction. Up on the slope, a lone figure, fast, agile, led the 3 pursuing soldiers deeper into the mountain. An experienced old soldier among them suddenly stopped and shouted for the others to halt. Something was wrong. Zhou and the other 2 hadn't followed. They were isolated. Before the 3 could react, a storm of arrows rained down from multiple directions at once. Over a dozen shafts came from the darkness simultaneously. Brief sounds of steel clashing. A few screams. Then silence. The snow kept falling. The wind kept howling. And whatever had just happened on that mountainside was swallowed by the night. Next morning, the snow finally stopped. Shuang and Chinru packed my food and polished my bow. They walked me to the gate and stood there watching until I disappeared. I knew what they were thinking. Just come home alive. On the way up, I couldn't shake the worry about Shuehongi. The river ditch villagers had been tracking me on the mountain. If they'd found the tunnel while I wasn't there, they could have stumbled right into her hiding place. 2 hours later, I reached the fortress. The cave was empty. Cold. No sign of her anywhere. General Shui? Hongi? Are you here? Nothing but echoes. No tracks, no evidence anyone had been there recently. With her fever and the blizzard, she couldn't have left on her own. Every alarm in my body went off at once. I reached for my bow. Don't move. One twitch, and I put an arrow through your skull. A rough voice behind me. I froze, hands up. I kept my voice calm. Told whoever it was we could talk this out. No need for weapons. He demanded to know how I'd found this place. I started to turn my head. An arrow slammed into the snow by my foot. He screamed at me not to look. But I'd already seen what I needed. The arrow was military-grade, armor-piercing tip. And the shot had been off-center with weak penetration. Whoever this was had real weapons, but average skill. He accused me of being a border soldier hunting deserters. His bowstring creaked as he drew it tighter. The instant before he released, I moved. I threw myself sideways, hit the ground rolling, and came up on one knee with my bow drawn. My arrow was in the air before he could react. It punched into his chest. He screamed and dropped. I already had the second arrow knocked, ready to finish him. I never hesitate with people trying to kill me. Ningyuan, stop. He's one of ours. Shuehongi came sprinting out of the tree line with several armed men behind her. She was still pale and sick-looking, but her voice cut through the air like a blade. The man I'd shot was cursing and tearing open his coat. My arrow had punched through his outer armor, but only gone in a few inches, not deep enough to kill. Lucky for him, I'd filed my arrowheads lighter for range, sacrificing some penetration. A big bearded soldier behind Shuehongi. I recognized him as one of the men who'd been with her at Mo village, put his hand on his sword, and asked whether they should kill me. Shuehongi shut him down immediately. Said I'd saved her life, and without me, she'd be dead in that cave. I kept my bow half drawn, aimed at the group. I wasn't lowering it for anyone. I told her straight. The man had genuinely tried to kill me, and I'd done nothing to deserve it. Then I said what I'd been piecing together. They were the deserters the border army was hunting. If they killed me, my brother Zhou Qiong would tear this mountain apart looking for answers. The bearded man exploded, saying they weren't deserters. They were Shui family soldiers, loyal to the general, here to clear her family's name. I told them their business was none of mine, but the pieces were falling into place. How Shuehongi had escaped from the prisoner transport, where she'd gotten weapons, warm clothes, and supplies. Her people had been behind her the whole time, waiting to break her out. She sighed and said I was smart to be cautious. By all logic, they should kill me to protect their secret. Then she said something that hit me like a punch to the gut. What if I told you that Zhou Qiong, the man you trust most, is actually one of mine? My whole body went cold. I told her to prove it. She sent the bearded man into the trees. A few minutes later, a familiar figure appeared in the distance, walking toward us through the snow. When I saw who it was, my heart sank all the way to the bottom. When I saw Zhou Qiong walk out of the trees and stand next to Shui Hongyi, I knew I was in deep trouble. If he was with them, getting out of here alive just got a lot harder. Zhou came over looking genuinely worried about me. He asked if I was okay. I stayed behind cover with my bow half raised and demanded an explanation. He sighed, opened his coat wide, and took a step forward. Brother, anything I say right now sounds like lies. If you still trust me, come out, and I'll tell you everything. If you don't, shoot me right here. I won't dodge. My hands were sweating. My heart was pounding. But I thought about everything we'd been through. The bandit attack, the arrow in his lung, him volunteering for the border to save me, riding back just in time to stop the mob at my gate. I lowered the bow and stepped out. I trust you. He nearly collapsed with relief, slapped my shoulder hard, and pulled me to the fire. Then I heard the whole story. A month ago, the Shui family, Hongyi's clan, which ran the Guangdong military command, was destroyed in a political purge. The men were beheaded that same night. The women were sent to military brothels. Hongyi was the last of the bloodline, branded and shipped off as a criminal woman. Her loyal soldiers broke her out and brought her here. Zhou Qiong was one of those loyal soldiers. He'd served in the Shui family's third banner. The powerful man who'd ruined his career and murdered his wife and daughter was the same political enemy who'd brought down the Shui family. It was the Shui family who'd secretly saved Zhou's life and hidden him in Qinghai County. When he talked about his dead wife and daughter, this Iron Man's eyes turned red and his voice cracked. The bearded soldier and the others dropped to their knees, shouting about overthrowing the corrupt emperor and marching on the capital. I sat there thinking, I'm a hunter who just wants a quiet life, and now I'm listening to treason. This is not something my ears should be hearing. Hongyi stayed calm. She said rebellion with 20 people was suicide. The empire was rotting from the inside and would collapse on its own eventually. Regional warlords were already building power. The smart move was to wait, hide, and pick the right side when the time came. Then she turned to me, crouched down, and looked me in the eyes with a smile I'd never seen on her face before. Ning Yuan, let's make a deal. I crossed my arms over my chest. I'm a law-abiding citizen, she laughed. She said she was just a helpless criminal woman now, and maybe I should turn her in to the magistrate and claim her as my own. She'd be registered as my wife, live in my house, play the obedient spouse, and use it as cover while waiting for the right moment to make her move. If she had children, they'd be mine. When she eventually found her path, she'd fake her death and disappear without causing me trouble. I jumped to my feet. Absolutely not. I had 2 wives already, and I was perfectly happy. She was a general's daughter, way above my station. The bearded man was outraged, pointing at my face, asking how a lowborn hunter could possibly deserve their commander. Hongyi ignored him. She circled me slowly, then put her hand on my chest and smiled sweetly, nothing like the cold warrior I'd known. If you refuse, I'll have someone report to Magistrate Zhao that a hunter in Moa village has been secretly refining salt. My blood froze. Salt production was a death sentence for me and my entire family. Zhou looked confused. He hadn't known she'd discovered my salt operation. I was trapped. She was willing to die, so threats meant nothing to her. But I wanted to live, and wanting to live was exactly the leverage she needed. She tilted her chin up. I'm not a bad deal, you know. I'll be a good wife. I'll take care of you properly. I looked around at her soldiers, every one of them staring at me like they wanted to rip me apart for even being in this conversation. She started to walk away. Fine. Someone go tell the Qinghai magistrate about the salt. Wait. I grabbed her arm. If I'm going to die either way, I can afford one more wife. She smiled like she'd won, then bowed to me formally. Husband, from now on Shui Hongyi belongs to you. Please be patient with me if I fall short. I was furious. She'd cornered me completely with the salt threat. I needed to make a point. So I stepped forward, grabbed her, and threw her over my shoulder, marching toward the back of the cave. The bearded man roared, demanding to know what I was doing. I stopped and looked back. This criminal woman is my wife now. I'm exercising my wedding night rights. Any objections? He looked ready to explode. But Hongyi, draped over my shoulder, just laughed. Well then, let's see what my husband is capable of. The bearded soldier Huba was furious watching me carry Hongi into the back of the cave. He couldn't understand why his beloved general would lower herself to a common hunter. Zhou sat by the fire and calmly explained to him that Hongi wasn't stupid. She'd chosen me because I was trustworthy, smart beyond my years, could refine salt better than the Imperial Salt Bureau, and could outshoot every soldier in their group. If I'd been born into a noble family, I'd already be someone important. Huba had no answer for that. He just clenched his fists and swallowed his anger. What happened between Hongi and me in that cave, I'll keep private. I'll just say this. The woman who commanded armies and killed enemy soldiers on horseback turned out to be equally intense in other areas. Afterwards, she lay in my arms, tracing her finger along my jaw, and asked if I'd ever thought about doing something big with my life in this chaotic world. I told her the truth. In chaos, you survive. In peace, you build a name. I was just a hunter who wanted to protect his small piece of ground and keep his women safe. Nothing more. She looked surprised, like she was seeing me for the first time. She said my words had more depth than she expected. We came out dressed and presentable. Huba saw her holding my arm and looked like his heart was breaking. To him, she'd sacrificed her purity to a peasant just so she could live openly under a legal identity. He was remembering the days when noble families competed for her hand. Hongi told him to stop moping and go heat water for her bath. Zhou handed her his flask of wine and said he needed to head back to the border to report in before anyone got suspicious. He and Hongi discussed their cover story. 4 of the 6 soldiers he'd brought were genuine border troops, not Shui family loyalists. Those 4 were now dead, killed last night during the ambush on the mountainside that I'd heard but not understood. Zhou would report that they died fighting 16 deserters who barricaded themselves in a river ditch village house. He'd say he burned the building down with the deserters inside. The charred corpses of the villagers already killed would pass as the deserters' remains. The border command wouldn't care about identifying burned bodies. They just wanted proof that deserters were punished as a warning to others. Hongi reminded him to watch out for a powerful family called the Huayang Wang clan at the border who'd be looking for reasons to make his life difficult. He nodded and left. Before going, Zhou told me that the Shui family were genuinely good people who'd been loved by common folk. He asked me to take care of Hongi until she found the right leader to follow. I was still staring at the fire, processing everything. Hongi pinched my side to snap me out of it. I mumbled goodbye to Zhou. Hongi invited me to bathe with her. Huba nearly had a stroke. He'd heated that water for his general, not for me. And what kind of indecency was a man and woman bathing together? Hongi ignored him and looked at me. But I wasn't interested. My mind was somewhere else entirely. Not regret about getting tangled up with rebels. I was already past that. I was planning something. A blueprint was forming in my head, bigger than anything I'd considered before. I stood up and walked over to Huba, told him to take the men outside and haul salt rocks back into the cave. He laughed in my face, said just because I'd slept with his general didn't mean I could order him around. Called me a worthless nobody. I shrugged. Fine. I'll go join my wife in the bath and mention that her soldiers just called me worthless. I'm sure she'll take that well. Huba panicked instantly. He grabbed my arm, told me not to go in there, and practically sprinted outside shouting for his men to start moving rocks. Sometimes the simplest leverage works best. Huba and his 16 men hauled several hundred pounds of salt rocks into the cave that afternoon. He thought I was just bossing him around to assert dominance. But when Hongi came out from her bath and stood right beside me examining those same rocks, he started to realize this wasn't a power play. Hongi asked if I was really going through with the salt refining. I told her my thinking had changed. Before, I'd planned to just make enough for my family. But now I needed a bigger operation. 2 reasons. First, if her rebellion plans ever blew up in my face, I'd need enough money stashed away to grab Shuaing and Qin Ru and run. Second, the Dacian Empire was clearly dying. I needed serious wealth and food reserves to survive whatever came next. She looked impressed. She asked how I planned to sell it. I told her the black market never lacks buyers. It lacks protection. With a strong enough backer, salt worth its weight in gold would sell itself. She nodded and said throughout history, whoever controlled grain, salt, and sugar could raise armies from nothing. The Dacian Empire itself had overthrown the previous dynasty exactly that way, by feeding starving refugees who became soldiers. I asked for her help. She understood immediately and turned to Ba and his men. They'd be crushing rocks and gathering firewood. Ba looked like he'd swallowed a toad. He used to command hundreds of soldiers as a military captain. Now he was being told to smash rocks for a hunter. But one look from Hongi shut him up. He bowed his head and got to work. With all these extra mouths to feed, I needed a hunt. I grabbed my bow and took Hongi out with me. Near the salt deposit, animals were plentiful. They came to lick the mineral-rich rocks. We spotted a roe deer standing in the open, just staring at us. Hongi asked why it wasn't running. I explained that's why they're called silly roe deer. They're so curious that even when they sense danger, they can't resist turning around to look at what's happening. Hongi jumped up and fired. Her arrow hit the deer in the belly. Good aim, but not a kill shot. It bolted. Before it got 6 meters, I put my arrow through its throat. It dropped. I told her that as a hunter's wife, she needed to learn that if the first shot doesn't kill, the prey runs deep into the mountains and you'll never find it again. She crossed her arms, annoyed, but then her eyes lit up. 3 more roe deer had appeared on a hillside 300 meters away. One of them was actually walking toward us, curious about the noise. She crept to about 150 paces and put an arrow clean through its throat. 1 shot, dead on the spot. She turned back with a smug look. Not bad, right? I walked over, reached up, and ruffled her hair. That's my hunter's wife. Quick learner, she froze. She said nobody had touched her head like that since her father. Her eyes went soft and wet. She stared at me for a long moment. What? I asked. She bit her lip, looking shy for the first time since I'd met her. Don't talk. Just keep doing that for a minute. I looked around the empty, snowy wilderness. Right here? In this cold, and I started taking off my pants. She grabbed my waistband in a panic. What are you doing? You said you wanted. I said, pat my head. What is wrong with you? Ba nearly lost his mind when Hongi and I walked back into the cave, each carrying a fat roe deer. His men had been sitting there for 2 days without catching a thing. Hongi pointed at me and asked if they still thought I was useless. Nobody had an answer. The smell of roasting meat washed away whatever grudges remained. When they tasted the venison with my refined salt, Ba actually started crying. He wiped his eyes and walked over to me with a formal bow. Called me son-in-law for the first time. Said he'd been blind and arrogant, and from now on, whatever I needed, he and his brothers were in. I accepted gracefully. I wasn't the grudge-holding type, and honestly, I needed these 16 men. Once the salt operation scaled up, I'd need muscle for protection when dealing with the black market. The real problem was heading home. How was I going to explain Shui Hongi to Shuang and Qinru? Hongi volunteered to handle it herself. Said women talk to women easier. I was skeptical, but let her take the lead. Bad idea. She walked into my yard at dusk, tall and imposing, standing there like she owned the place. Shuang nearly fainted. All 3 women assumed she'd come to arrest me for the salt. Shuang dropped to her knees begging for mercy, crying that I was the only man in the family and they hadn't given me an heir yet. Qinru joined her on the ground. Hongi looked completely thrown. This wasn't going according to plan at all. She turned toward the gate and called out, "Husband, I think I overdid it. You'd better come handle this." The word, husband, hit my women like lightning. They whipped around and saw me shuffling through the gate with a roe deer on my shoulder, scratching my head with a sheepish grin. So, we're adding 1 more sister to the family. That okay? Total silence. 3 pairs of eyes bouncing between me and the 6-foot warrior woman standing in their living room. After about 15 minutes of awkward explanation, things slowly settled. Shuang and Qinru started fussing over Hongi, pouring hot water, offering her warm clothes. They were still terrified of her, but trying their best. She was a real general who'd killed enemy soldiers. Having her in the house was like adopting a tiger. Hongi played it perfectly. She said she was just a criminal woman now, ranked below everyone. She asked to be called second wife, since she was 20, older than Shuang but younger than Qinru. She took their hands and promised to help run the household. At bedtime, Shuang suggested she and Qinru sleep in Xiaowan's room so Hongi and I could have the main bed. She gave Qinru a meaningful look. More women means more chances for heirs. They grabbed Xiaowan and disappeared before Hongi could object. Hongi panicked. After what I'd put her through in the cave that morning, she could barely walk straight. She started making excuses about sleeping in the side room. Too late. The door was already shut. I picked her up. Ning Yuan, not tonight. I really can't. I kissed her before she could finish the sentence. She fought back for about 3 seconds, then gave up. Outside, the winter wind shook the bare tree branches all night long. Next morning, Hongi was already up practicing with her saber in the snowy yard. The blade moved so fast it kicked up clouds of snow. Behind the door crack, Shuaying, Qin Ru, and Xiaowan watched with their mouths hanging open. They'd never seen a woman like this, a warrior who could kill men on a battlefield. Xiaowan's eyes were shining. I think she was imagining herself in armor. I butchered the remaining roe deer and told the women to follow Hongi around the village, distributing meat to every household. Same strategy as before: share the food, buy goodwill, prevent desperate neighbors from turning on us. Hongi backed me up without being asked. She told the women that after what happened in River Ditch Village, keeping people fed was the only way to keep them from going insane. Xiaowan pouted about giving away our food, but Hongi fixed her with that general stare, and the girl shut right up. Afterward, I told Shuang we were taking Hongi to see the magistrate to register her as my wife. The criminal woman status was a loose end that needed tying. Shuang was worried. Qinru squeezed Hongi's arm and told her not to worry. She was family now, no matter what any document said. Hongi's jaw tightened, and she marched ahead without a word, too proud to show she was moved. I made her leave the saber at home. She looked at me like I'd asked her to cut off her own hand, but she handed it over. At the county office, the magistrate took one look at Hongi standing behind me and nearly dove under his desk. He screamed for guards to seize her. 6 men with clubs surrounded her instantly. Even unarmed, she shifted into a fighting stance that made every one of them hesitate. The aura of someone who'd killed dozens of enemy soldiers in combat radiated off her like heat. I jumped in front of her and told Zhao she was with me. We'd already consummated the marriage. I was here to register her officially and pay whatever fees were required. Zhao was stunned. He couldn't figure out how a village hunter had tamed this terrifying woman. I told him we'd fallen in love. He looked at Hongi, who was standing there radiating murder but not denying it, and decided to believe me. Then came the humiliating part. Zhao said there were no fees. Hongi could just go home with me for free. That set her off. She snapped at him. Was she really worth nothing? Even the lowest-ranked criminal slave cost a few taels to claim. Was she less than that? Zhao nearly fell over trying to hide behind his guards. I smoothed things over and got us out of there before she actually killed someone. On the way to the market, she was still fuming. I sold 4 roe deer legs and some ribs to a wealthy woman's servant. I'd priced them at 2 taels per pound, thinking I was aiming high. The woman grabbed everything without bargaining. Over 80 taels for about 40 pounds of meat. She practically ran away with it before I could change my mind. Hongi laughed coldly and called me an idiot. Said I could have gotten 3 taels per pound easily. She was right. I thought about how Zhang Quangue had lowballed me on the bear meat and cursed his name. I was packing up to leave when a gang of thugs surrounded us. Maybe 10 men with clubs, led by a mean-looking man with a skinny woman on his arm. Hongi's eyes narrowed. She stepped forward and pushed me behind her. Get behind me. The leader swaggered up, asking who gave me permission to sell meat on his turf and accusing me of undercutting the market prices. I stepped in front of Hongi. Letting my woman fight my battles wasn't my style. I was about to talk my way through it when the gang leader waved his hand and said, "Break his legs." So much for diplomacy. A dozen thugs rushed me at once. The first one tried to kick me in the chest. I dodged sideways and cracked him across the nose with my fist. He stumbled back bleeding. But 3 more came from different angles. One bear hugged my waist while the others piled on. I was about to go down. Then Hongi moved. She grabbed the back of my collar and yanked me clean out of the pile like I weighed nothing. I hit the ground hard on my backside. The gang leader eyed Hongi's long legs and made a filthy comment about what he'd like to do with them. The grin froze on his face half a second later. She was already among his men. 2 lightning kicks sent 2 of them flying. She tore through all of them in less than a minute. 15 men, every one of them on the ground groaning. Then she walked up to the leader, grabbed him by the belt and collar, lifted his entire body over her head, and slammed him into the snow so hard he almost passed out. She put her boot on his back and asked if he'd had enough. He begged for mercy. She turned to me and asked what I wanted to do with him. I coughed and told her next time maybe leave me a little dignity. I was supposed to be the man here. She raised an eyebrow and said if she hadn't stepped in, I'd be dead already. Fair point. The beaten leader babbled about working for someone called Third Master, who controlled this whole market. I smiled and told him to take me there. That was actually my plan from the beginning. I deliberately caused a scene at the market to attract attention and get an introduction to whoever ran the underground. On the way, Hongi whispered, asking why I wanted to meet this local boss. I told her that behind every market, there's a black market. She understood instantly. I'd engineered this whole confrontation to make contact with the man who could sell my salt. Third Master's compound was big and loud, full of men drinking and groping terrified criminal women who'd been forced to serve as entertainment. When we walked in, every man in the room stared at Hongi. But Third Master was sharper than his thugs. He sensed the killing aura radiating off her and dropped his playful attitude immediately. I got straight to business. Told him I had a proposition. Then I tossed him a small cloth bag. He opened it, saw what was inside, and his face went white. He screamed for everyone to leave the room.